This view right here, it does something. Any idea what that might be? I'll just walk around for a moment and just take it in. As we round our pathway that we built a couple of episodes, and we really take in all of the custom trees that we have around here, but then we turn the corner and we see the house up on the hill, and, you know, ignore the horse up there doing its thing. But we've got our house, we've got our trees, and the little pathway that sort of rounds this bend right up next to this cliffside, and we see this bridge right here. Not only that, but we have the sunlight shining down on this singular flower right here through the canopy that sits above. All of these things have something in common, and it's something that I haven't really brought up too much in this world as of yet. But all of these little things, they make you feel something. And I think first and foremost, that comes from an art perspective. One thing that I've been trying to do a lot more in this world is approach building as an art form. So rather than just wanting to build something cool for the sake of building something cool and worrying about how it looks in Minecraft and what blocks I use, and all of the traditional things that you might think of when it comes to building, at least on a more basic level, my approach in this world has instead been, how do we make it art? And more specifically, what are some artistic techniques that we can use to paint a picture? Now, obviously, we're not literally painting a picture. I'm not even drawing the things out before I build them. But I think for the most part, there's a lot of overlap that can be had between art and building in Minecraft, and they can be one and the same a lot of the time. I think the most impactful thing when it comes to art of any form is what it can do to us as humans. The emotions that it can draw out of us, whether it's listening to a powerful song, whether it's looking at a piece that you could look at for hours because of all of the details, or maybe a book you read that by the end of it, you don't know what to do with your life because you just can't handle the fact that it's over. All of these different art forms and all of these different methods, they all make you feel something, and I think that's the power of art. And I think that can also apply to builds in Minecraft. Now, that's not to say that everything that we've built up to this point in this world is necessarily anything that powerful. That being said, this area is the start of something that, when added to everything that we build in the future, and as it comes together piece by piece, will eventually create a much larger piece that does leave you feeling something much, much stronger. What exactly it leaves you feeling is a little different from person to person, but I think that's part of the fun of art, is how it can be interpreted and how it can make one person feel versus another. So why am I mentioning all of this talk about art and how it makes you feel and how we can tie that into building in Minecraft? Well, as we cross our bridge right here, we are not just literally crossing a bridge, but we are also metaphorically crossing a bridge. Over there, on the far side of the river, we've got the fantasy area of our world here, of the Inspire project. Everything beyond this bridge, off in that direction, and everything to the left of this line of trees right here. That is going to be our fantasy region. Now, we will split this into 3 different areas, and the area beyond the trees, over where we have our sheep farm and recently constructed moss contraption, all of that will be determined in the future. But for now, we are going to cross the bridge and shift our focus to this side of the river and everything that lies beyond in this field here. Now, there is a specific style that I intend to build with over in this area, but one of the biggest things that I want to do alongside the style that we're going to be using is that I want you to feel something. Whether it's just crossing this bridge, whether it's walking through the area, whether it's watching it get built, whatever it might be, this area is going to be about more than just catching your eye. I want this to also catch your mind. I want this area over on this side of the bridge to tell a story just by looking at it. And as we walk through it in the future, once we have more of it built up, I want you to feel like you're experiencing a story just by being here and by taking in all of the sights and sounds. I think that is powerful. And it's not really something that I've done in building before. Most of my building up to this point might be a part of a larger story, sure, but the builds themselves don't often tell a story themselves. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to play around with here, alongside everything else that we've been doing in the name of becoming better builders. This is something that I'll be doing in this episode, but it's also something that I want you to consider. Just think about it. Go around in a build that you've done, or maybe a couple different builds you've done, and don't necessarily redo them, but walk through them and just think about, if you could tell a story in that build, what would you do differently? Or maybe you did tell a story in a build. Maybe you told a story and you don't even realize it. Just thinking about the alternative ways to approach a build and the alternative things that it might do outside of just have a purpose or outside of just looking cool. These are all things that I think we could consider as we build and create things in this game that could make us infinitely better, and I think also make what we do infinitely more impactful. Now, I've played a lot of games in my day, and I think the biggest inspiration for why I want to try this in building, at least from a visual standpoint and from something that really made me feel something, has got to be Elden Ring. Now, Elden Ring is not a game that's for everyone. The Souls games themselves are a pretty niche genre of game, and you've definitely got to be quite committed to play one all the way through without giving it up. But forget about the difficulty and about the actual gameplay for just a second. And I just want you to take in what this game looks like. Every last detail in the design of this game makes you feel a certain way. It doesn't just pull your eye, but these are things that get you thinking. This is an area that tells a story, and that is what I would like to capture. And so I've chosen an area. We're a bit further away from where we've got our fantasy set up with our house on the hill and our tree over top. If we come all the way out over here, we've got the ocean stretching out in that direction right there. It's just over the lip of this grass right here. And a little bit further down, I've got a bunch of barrels set up with some materials. Now, the ocean off in the distance, you can start to see showing up right here. It does sort of curve its way into this little inlet right here as the shores get a little bit sandy, and we get a little bit of a river starting to form its way inland off in that direction. Now, in typical Minecraft fashion, we've got a little bit of scuff right there where the river gets really, really shallow, and you can't really tell if it's supposed to be going further or not. But that's something to focus on a little bit later. And over here, we're actually pretty close to where we have our nether portal and our skeleton farm. Our portal's right there, and the skeleton farm is just up on this hill. World spawn is just over the way over in that direction. But if we shift our focus over here to the beach, I've got all of these barrels set up with various materials inside of them, as over the past couple of weeks, I've been preparing for what I want to do in this episode. As you can see in all of these barrels, I've planned out all of the different materials I will need, and I've gotten most everything, a little bit more than what I might need for some of this stuff, just so we don't run out. It's always better to have a little bit more than a little bit less. But as you can see, we've got all sorts of different materials right here, and you might be thinking to yourself, this is a lot of material. You would absolutely be correct. What we're about to put together in the ocean off of this shoreline will absolutely change everything. Alright, we've got ourselves a start out in the water. Now, there was no natural islands around here to work with, so I decided it would be fine if we went ahead and built up one of our own. The biggest thing with what we're trying to create here is something that is detached from the mainland and feels that way, but also something that as we go further along, you'll get a better feel of, really overlooks and almost overpowers a lot of the land that you'll be looking at it from. And I want that feeling to almost be a little bit of this intimidation or uneasy sort of feeling from wherever you are in the land when you look over at what we are building here. At least, you know, when it's fully done. As if the presence of what we're putting here is always on people's minds. It's always looming in the background, it's always watching. Or maybe someone inside is always watching, either case. What we're building here is, in a way, going to bring a lot of what we do in this land together, but not necessarily in a positive light. And on that note, it doesn't necessarily have to be in too negative a light either. Somewhere in between, like I had mentioned, a little bit of an uneasy or sort of intimidated, even ominous sort of presence, but not outright bad and not outright good either. With all of that in mind, I decided having it a little bit detached out here and on this little custom island would work best. Now, for the island itself, I went for something that leans pretty fantasy, I would say. I mentioned earlier how Elden Ring is a big inspiration, and I like a lot of what the terrain does in that map. You get a lot of these crazy rock formations that you couldn't really explain, at least I don't think you could explain from like a real life, real earth sort of perspective, but sometimes that's okay. You don't need everything to kind of follow the actual laws of nature. So I went for this sort of jutting out of the ground, almost otherworldly or even magically affected sort of terrain, where we've got these stone columns almost that are kind of forming out of the terrain. Obviously, they're not perfect columns. They sort of blend into this natural slope that kind of rises up from the water. But all in all, it comes up to the base of the spire that we will be building. And I think once you start to see the base of the structure come into place, you'll get a better idea as to how this terrain complements what we're doing. Before we get to that point though, I wanted to explain a little bit of my thought process behind what we're doing, and specifically with each section as we go. And now with the base of the terrain done, we can move into getting the first part of the structure complete. I'd say now we're starting to feel something. Now this feels like something that would be in the back of your mind wherever you were so long as it was in sight. It looms overhead off in the distance and provides this ominous and mysterious sort of presence. One of the biggest things that I wanted to do with this build is really hammer home a lot of the shading that we have going on. And not only that, but as a matter of fact, I used the shading to play a little bit of a trick on your eye. There are actually only 2 of these archways built in with actual blocks, and that third one is entirely done using shading. But of course, a build like this is meant to be seen from far away distances and meant to really fill that backdrop and just be there at all times, while not particularly being the main focus at all times. So what that does is allow us to play some tricks with things like shading and the blocks we're using. Now, those of you guys who have been around for a while will know that this is unlike anything I have ever built before. And I would agree. I've never done anything quite like this, but the whole premise behind this episode was that we are going to do something that will change everything. One of the main things I wanted to do in this series was catalog my journey to become one of the better builders in Minecraft. Now, I'll be the first to say, I'm nowhere close to the best. I don't think we'll get anywhere close to the best, but if my name's in the conversation at some point in the future, I think we will have succeeded. That's the goal. I want to prove that you can do anything you set your mind to. It just so happens that for me, becoming a better builder is my thing. And I do think with what we've got constructed here, we're off to a good start. But it's a start nonetheless. We've got more work to do if we want to complete the Ascendant Spire. Can you feel it yet? I think once you get far enough out that the fog starts to roll in and just slightly obscure what we're doing here, I think that's when this is at its best. Now, from here as well, interestingly enough, you can't actually see the water, so at least from everywhere up on this hill and maybe a little further back, you wouldn't even know that it's in the ocean and not actually attached to the land. And I think that adds to the effect as you get a little bit closer and you see the water kind of roll in on all the sides, and it becomes a little more apparent that it is indeed on this little outcropping of stone that's just got a little bit of grass and moss starting to kind of grow on top of it. I think that really plays into the effect that we're going for here. So one thing that you might be wondering at this point is we do of course have the door on the left side of the building over there, and that's not from a straight on perspective. How are we going to get to this tower? The goal is that we will eventually build something that connects, and it will go all the way across the water and kind of use up this space over here. And then from there, I'm a little undecided, but it'll either connect this way to the terrain or it'll continue straight all the way over to that shore over there. Either way, I think whatever we do back there, we can have a lot of fun with building out in this same style, some sort of bridge and maybe even some smaller towers, like a lot smaller, to kind of go along that bridge as it brings it to the mainland. For now though, our focus remains on the main build itself. As I mentioned a little bit ago, we're calling this the Ascendant Spire, and there's a couple of reasons for that. For one, it ascends into the sky pretty tall, and for two, on a little bit of a deeper level, something that I had also mentioned a little earlier was that I'm trying to take a big step here as a builder in all sorts of regards: technique, block choice, shading, and even building on more curves and diagonals. As you can see with the upscaled version we've got right here, we've made that a little bit easier on ourselves versus something that would be a little smaller. But the point being that I want this to represent our ascent as builders. So I figured what better name than the Ascendant Spire. And I think we can tie that in to a little bit of lore that we can work on over time. Something that we had talked about is telling a story with what we build out in this area. And I think starting with the name we've given this, that can be a really good basis to go off of. I mentioned that our goal was to go for something that looms in the distance, something that's pretty ominous and foreboding. If you're anywhere within the area in which this can be seen or that this oversees, it's always on your mind. It's always over your shoulder and makes you feel a little uneasy. And I think that's a great first step towards telling the story that we want to tell right here. By calling it the Ascendant Spire, we kind of give it this little bit of information that isn't too much. We're not over-explaining, but it just places that little nugget that makes you wonder a little bit, right? Things like, is the Ascendant a person? Is it a deity? Does it just refer to how tall the building is? There's tons of different questions that this can give you, just this little bit of information on the name. And that's something that I think, combined with the power of what this does, just being in the background, just being within your vision, starts to paint a really interesting picture and lays the foundation for a really interesting story that can be told within this area. Now, a couple of the fun little details that I've used here, I explained a little bit of what we did down on this first level, and then on the second level, it was a lot of the same, but there's a couple new things. So with each of these big windows, I tried to have some unique shapes in there. I didn't want to just have the same thing going on all the way around the tower. And you won't see it from this angle right here, but if you come in from the ocean, there's even a different set of windows on the opposite side as well. Now, the second layer only has windows on the diagonals, and then on the flat surfaces, I went for this sort of archway design, and it gets a little bit darker behind the top row just to add that very level of intrigue in terms of the coloration and shading that we have going on to this area. Now, I also did that deep slate tile technique right here where we've made it look like we have 3 separate archways up towards the top, and I'm not sure how well it comes in over the video, but that's just deep slate tile, and then we do have 2 actual archways with differing layers of blocks. But similar to what we did down here, that just kind of allows us to play a little bit of a game on your mind. Now, some of you guys may have already pieced it together. What we're building back here is heavily inspired by the Divine Towers in Elden Ring. I've talked about it today a lot already, but Elden Ring is going to be a huge inspiration to this entire area, and I figured what better way to start this area than by building something influenced by what I think is one of my favorite things in that game, at least from an architectural standpoint. Now, I've taken the base idea of what those towers accomplish and some of my favorite details from them and added my own little twist to it, but for those of you guys who are more familiar, you will know that there is actually a third tier that goes on top of these two increments, and I think I like that detail. I'm pretty sure we have some more blocks to work with before we hit build height. I can't believe it. It's finally done. I cannot properly tell you how many hours went into this project alone. It's been about 3 or 4 weeks in the making, a lot of creative planning time to get the design done, and then a ton of time to actually get it built in the world here, not to mention all the materials that it took as well. Somewhere north of 60,000 blocks went into this build right here. I was able to shave a good number off of the original estimate just by kind of trimming out some of the insides that don't get seen as well. And overall, now that I can see it in its finished state, this is without a doubt and by far the best thing that I have ever created. And this is only like our 6th episode of the series already. I'm not sure what got into me or what led to this happening, but at the end of the day, I'm super, super happy with it. And that's been something I've been trying to avoid saying is I like how something looks or I'm happy with it, because it's kind of been a little bit of like a crutch term or something that I'll just kind of say to fill space. And I'm trying to be a little bit more nuanced with everything once we see the result of it or as we're kind of going through it. But no, like genuinely, this is, I am really kind of left speechless. I to this day, do not know how this happened, and I've had the creative design done for a little bit now. It's just been a matter of getting ready to build it in an episode here in the actual world, and I think this is the perfect start to an area out here where we can start to really focus on telling a story. I've talked about it a bunch today alone, but telling a story is going to be our focus in this area specifically. Now, the style and theme is definitely going to follow this sort of heavy medieval, little twinges of fantasy, this kind of grim, darker kind of feel to it, that very Elden Ring or Souls game kind of aesthetic. But on top of that, of course, we want to tell a story with the builds. We want to paint a picture, and we want you to feel something as you are walking through this area, as you're seeing all of the things that we'll eventually put together. And I don't think a build has ever made me feel as much as this one right here. Whatever that emotion is, I think it might be different for everyone, the kind of vibes that you might get from something like this looming in the background. But it stops you in your tracks when you see it, and you can't help but just kind of take it in as it looms overhead. I think we've accomplished something really, really cool, and it just has me even more excited for some of the rest of the things that we can do in this area. Now, you can see just off in the distance over there where we have our house just in the fog, our big tree, and then the line of trees that's starting our forest in that direction. So we're not too far away, but I strategically put this here so that you wouldn't see it from that house. Now, the reason for that is that what we're doing over here, especially with this main focal point right here, is trying to tell that story that feels a little more grim, a little darker, a little more ominous, and that kind of clashes just a little bit with what we're doing by the house over there. So, if we make our way back over to where we have the house and our tree up on the hill, along this pathway right here, you can see that there's nothing out in the distance, at least with what our current render distance is set to. Now, if we start to make our way onto this bridge, which I had mentioned before is going to transition us into this area, that's why it was built in such a way that kind of clashes just a little bit with this area, but not too bad. As soon as we step up on this bridge and start making our way over, you'll start to see that it starts to render in way off in the distance. Now, obviously, it's super foggy from here with how I have my settings, But once you kind of crest over the top of that bridge, you start to see this in the background, right as you set foot on this area of the world, being that the river is our divider. So there is a little bit of an area in between where you can see both what we've just built, the Ascendant Spire, and our house over here on the hill. And I think that's fine. The biggest thing was just not seeing what we're doing over here, at least the main part, from our original fantasy area. Eventually, we're going to have a road that makes its way from the pathway through this area once we figure out what we want to do with different builds, where we want to meander the path, what we want the terrain to look like, all of that sort of stuff. And as we make our way closer and closer, the build will start to be a little more visible through the fog. I love playing around with the fog settings, trying to get builds like this to just slowly become visible throughout. I think the only downside is when you're too far away, but it's still rendered and it's just like a big white silhouette. I kind of wish it was a little darker, but and what can you do? At the end of the day, I think it's worth it when you start to get some of these looks right here. And I think it's a little bit better once you get right up to here. It's not quite fully clear yet. You just got that little haziness to it. I think it just does so much for the effect. And this is very much the main build of this area. We're kind of starting big with it, and then everything else we do from here is just going to be complementary pieces, or at least things that work well in tandem with this build right here. At least that's the plan for now. I can't build something quite that big very often, and as a matter of fact, this might take the record for new biggest thing that I've ever built, at least in terms of like one single structure. So definitely a one-off, one-of-a-kind thing, but I think we can take a lot of what we learned in this build and apply it to some of the other things we want to do around here. We're going to be using this palette a lot, along with some other palettes that we haven't done out in this area quite yet. But there's a lot of fun techniques that I learned here that I definitely look forward to trying to apply. Things like those fake arches just done with pure shading alone, all of the shading work itself that we've done up in this area, some of the new shapes that I experimented with. I did a lot of work with these columns and trying to get those to look right, doing things like flaring them out up towards the top, and that's a trend that you'll see all the way up to the very top of the build itself. There's a ton of small details all throughout the build, but given the scale that we built it on, I didn't actually need to do anything too crazy on those finer details. A lot of it is just the shapes we used at the scale that we used them at. And a good example of that is down here where we have these little notches right here, these little triangular shapes. These are just full blocks. I played around a little bit with slabs and stairs, but given the scale we're at, we really didn't need to do that at all. And it ended up looking better just as full blocks itself, which is crazy considering for most of any build that I've ever done before, stairs and slabs are needed and full blocks were kind of icky. But that's something that I'm going to have to train my brain on. And for those of you guys who are also trying to build a little bit bigger, something you guys will have to think about as well is when you're building bigger, you don't need as many slabs and stairs and trapdoors and the smaller blocks. The scale alone allows you to get a little bit more creative with some of the shapes using just normal blocks and some things that you usually wouldn't use if you were on a smaller scale. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but eventually we're going to connect the spire up with the mainland. We're going to build out here a little bit of a bridge. We might have like a smaller tower in the middle of the bridge, some kind of connecting piece. Whatever that case might be, I'm not sure when exactly we'll get to it, but that'll be something that needs to get done to get this properly connected to the land. We're not going to keep it completely isolated out there on its island. But one thing that I do want to do with the spire here is I actually want to put a creeper farm inside of it. That's something that I've been struggling on and very much needing as of late in the world here for all of the resource gathering and traveling I have to do for all of that. Having some more rocket availability would be great. So the goal is to put a creeper farm in here somewhere, and I think we can also get away with farming sugarcane as well, and all of the space that we have in there means that I'll probably go for something that auto crafts the rockets. We'll have a mix of gunpowder coming in and a mix of sugarcane being crafted into paper, and then we can craft those into rockets with the new auto crafters we have. So at the end of the day, I think we could have something where we show up to the spire and that's just got rockets ready for us to go. There would most likely be a benefit to keeping some of the gunpowder though, so I would probably try to figure out how to have a little offshoot to keep some of the profit. That's a redstone project for another day, however. Another thing that this build did to kind of teach me a little bit along our journey here in the Inspire series is that I don't think this should be the kind of series that's narrowed down to a 1-week window. We've been releasing every Wednesday so far. It's been a nice 7-day split between each of the episodes. But with what I'm trying to accomplish in each of the episodes, some of them might just need a little bit more time. So I think we're going to go away from the every Wednesday release. That doesn't mean that we're hardly going to have any episodes and it's going to take a month long, nothing like that. But we're going to shift to more of a loose kind of 6 to 10 days between releases and less of a hard line at 7. And that's going to allow me to try to get done the things that I want to get done in each episode without them feeling rushed at the end of it. A little bit in that Redstone episode that we had a little bit ago, we kind of had that feeling I couldn't get a build done because of everything that I was doing throughout the week, including trying to prep for this build in this episode here. So keep that in mind going forward. It probably won't be strictly Wednesday uploads, but we'll figure it out. Beyond that, I've already got some other build plans coming together for future things that I want to do in this world, but man, have I been excited for this to come together and for you guys to finally see it. I learned so much in building this, and I hope that along the way, even though we definitely leaned a little more cinematic with it and a little less tutorial with it, I hope that you guys learned some fun little tricks, some cool techniques, or you just had a good time watching it come together. Whatever the case might be, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a couple of my biggest inspirations for putting this specific thing together. I have been talking about Elden Ring all episode, and of course that is a big part of it, but I think there's two people in particular that I think influenced a lot of how this came together. One of them being Megiibyte, I've mentioned before in previous episodes. That's the builder I watched the most of and who has definitely shaped me more than anyone else. And another one is Hoof, who I briefly mentioned in the Redstone episode as well. I've seen Hoof do a lot of really cool things with this palette and a little bit in this style as well. And they've both been really good for learning how to build and getting some inspiration from. Today, we've got some pretty big tasks ahead of us, and both involve the spire that we built in the last episode. The first thing that we're going to need to focus on is a mixture of gunpowder and also sugarcane. So I think we're going to do that through various levels in this tower. I'm not entirely sure yet, but we do have most of the build height area here to work with, so it shouldn't really be an issue of space, and more so just how we use that space on the inside. And then, of course, the other thing that we need to do is connect the spire to the mainland. Of course, right now there's no way to get in unless we swim all the way over there, and even then it's all kind of blocked off from there, so we'll need to figure out a couple of things. The first of which is that we are going to connect a bridge to the doorway, which is just out of view over here to the left side of the structure. We're going to have a bridge that goes all the way across the water and eventually connects to the shoreline way over on that side. And the reason that we're going to connect it way over there as opposed to anywhere over here is that I felt like with the style of bridge that we're about to go for, it worked a lot better if it just kind of shot off into the distance in more of a straight line rather than if we tried to curve it around or give it any angles or anything like that. A big thing that that does is it's going to fill this area right here. When we're looking out in this direction towards the Ascendant Spire from much of where anything is going to be built in this region, you're going to be able to see not only the spire itself taking up much of the view, but the bridge that connects it as it dissipates off into the fog and that shoreline over yonder. What it also will do is help draw your eye to the fact that there is a river outletting into the ocean right here, and then you can follow that river inland as we go. Over time, we'll of course fix the river down there, we'll expand it onward, and we might even have it tie into some more things further inland. But I think the bridge connecting to the spire in this area will be a great way to start to tie this entire region together and really give us a good baseline to work off of once we start putting some other builds around this area as well. So we've got a couple really important things that we want to get to. I'm struggling for rockets, so the creeper farm is going to be a huge element of it, but I don't want to do that until we can get this thing connected and get that build in place. I think once we do that, we'll be setting ourselves up nicely to really get down to some of the technical stuff on the inside of our spire here. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get a bridge in place. I want to make sure that I take the time to go over a couple of the details that we're using in the building here. I've heard some feedback from a fair few of you guys that you'd like to see a little bit more of what goes into these builds and some of the details that we use within them. That's something that we did really good in the first couple of episodes, but I've kind of moved away from a little bit unintentionally, and so I want to try to get back to that, starting with the details that you can notice right here underwater. We're building much of the bridge out of the same block palette that we used to build the Ascendant Spire in the previous episode. That being said, there are areas where we need to change it up a little bit. Of course, we're going to have shading like we did in the tower and some of our other builds so far in this world, but more specifically once you start interacting with water. So what I wanted to do was get a palette of shading for specifically in the water, and that palette looks a lot like the normal shading, just on a little bit of a larger scale and with the implementation of some mossy cobble. We just transition from our normal palette into mossy cobble, and we kind of give it a varied and different look so that it's not too much of the same thing going on. And then we transition that into tuff, acacia logs, basalt, and finally deep slate tile at its darkest. What that's going to do is ever so subtly just change the look of the parts of the structure that are underwater versus those that are above the water. But it's something that's still ever so slightly noticeable, and if you start playing around with some clearer water or even shaders, you'll notice it even more. The next thing that I want to bring some attention to are these large windows that I have towards the base of the structure. This is probably one of my favorite details to play with in areas that we can at least make it work, and that's the multi-layered window effect. So as you can see with the close-up shot right here, we're actually using a total of 3 entire layers to make these windows happen. We've got the outer layer, which is mostly just air blocks surrounded by the foundation of the build itself, the usual block palette, and the opening of the window. Up towards the top, we've got a couple of walls and stairs just to kind of help sell that archway. And then on the next layer in the middle, it's also mostly air blocks, but this is where it gets a little more interesting. I've used one line of mixed tough walls all the way up into a little archway using tough bricks and normal tough blocks as well to create the secondary layer of shapes within the window, these 2 archways that are kind of split on either side of the main big archway. And finally, on that 3rd layer, we've got the basalt. Now, the purpose that the basalt serves is just to make it look like it's dark in the interior of this building. One thing that we kind of lose out on in Minecraft is when you're looking through the window of a structure, you can't really quite get the lighting on the inside to do what you want it to, at least in comparison to maybe real-world examples or examples from other games. The interior we want to feel very dark and ominous, and like you can't really see into it the same way you could see out of it. And a good way to do that is to use colored blocks behind these windows to artificially create that effect. Now, one thing that you've seen me do a lot is use things like deep slate tiles. We did that in the spire, but in this structure specifically, I tried deep slate tile and it wasn't quite working, at least for these windows. I think a big part of that is how big these windows are relative to the structure itself. These take up so much of the space that we have on this cube that the dark gray, almost black color of the deep slate tile was almost overpowering. So I decided to switch that to basalt, which we do also use in some of our other shading on the exterior to create a ever so slightly lighter yet still dark, especially from far away effect, much like the approach we're taking with most everything that we're building in this world, at least in the early days of it. Overall, the multi-layered window effect is something that can work really, really well, but do be careful because it does narrow down how much space you have on the inside. So if you plan on putting some interiors in a building or having some walkable space, just know that if you're doing this with windows, it can get out of control really, really quickly. That is the most important part of the bridge that we're going to be building here. I think I've hinted at it before, but I wanted the bridge to connect to a structure other than the spire itself somewhere along the way across the water. And the reason I did that is mostly just for this enhanced effect to add something that draws your eye a little bit more than just having the bridge fill the space here. Something that it can kind of connect to as a larger supporting piece and have it transition from where it might connect to the land to the part that strictly covers the water all the way on the run up to the main building. And I think what we've put together serves that purpose pretty well. I didn't want it to be too big. I didn't want it to take your eye away from what we have going on here, but instead just be a nice complementary piece to the bigger picture. You can faintly see right here where I have this doorway laid out. This is going to be where the main bridge connects, and that's why this wall right here is pretty flat. It's all going to be filled in by how the bridge ends up looking, and that of course is going to stretch all the way up to the front door of the spire, which is just around this corner. That part did take a lot of materials as is, but over here I've taken to reusing some of what we had set up for the Ascendant Spire itself, and I've got a good amount of materials laid out for the main bridge, which we can get to building pretty quickly here so that we can move on to the next part, which involves a little bit of redstone. As I put together the length of the bridge here that sprawls to the spire itself, I decided a really good tactic would be to use the shading on the actual walkable path itself. And I did that in a particular manner. I used the darkest blocks on the outer edge, that kind of tough brick and acacia bark sort of texture and color pattern. And what I was trying to do with that was represent some of the dirtier, lesser traveled areas of the pathway. A lot of the time, people like to default to making the walked part of the path the messiest or dirtiest, and that can make sense in like terrain and dirt paths and that sort of thing, but at least for this style right here, where we've got this stone base and very like man-made sort of area or walkable surface, it felt like the stone or the rocks would be almost more polished in a way. Like all of the dirt that would be there would be kicked up and kind of brushed off to the side from the foot traffic. At least that was what made sense in my head. So what I did was I went darker on the outer sides and then I went lighter on the inside. So we transitioned from tough bricks to that acacia bark into a mix of cobblestone and regular tough, which is just a little bit lighter. And then from there, on the main sort of walked surface as you meander all the way down the bridge, we've got a combination of stone bricks and polished andesite. And as the top of it gets finished here, it makes itself a little bit more apparent. You can kind of see the areas that are traveled upon a little more frequently, as well as the areas that aren't really touched that much, where a lot of this dirt and grime can sort of gather completely undisturbed. We did it. We connected the spire. Bridge is done. End of episode. I'm just kidding. We haven't even gotten to the best part. It's time for redstone. Well, it shouldn't actually involve that much redstone. We just need to set up a creeper farm in here and then a little bit of a sugarcane contraption. I think that'll be where most of the redstone is, but I think the creeper part will probably be pretty simple. I know there's a bunch of different ways that you can do creeper farms in the game, and I've seen a wide range of them, from using cats to using water on a timer to even some attempts at using snow golems and such. But I think the method of choice for our creeper farm in the Ascended Spire is probably going to be a traditional water on a timer sort of setup. So that'll pretty much consist of however many platforms we put together. We'll wire up a little bit of a timer with some observers and dispensers kind of going up in a chain, and then every time that goes off, it'll, dispense water, push creepers off the edge, and then get picked back up, creepers spawn, rinse and repeat. Pretty simple design. And I don't imagine there's very many ways to mess that kind of thing up. It seems pretty simple, and there's not a lot of redstone involved, so what's the worst that can happen? I suppose there is the whole matter that I don't know how many platforms to build or how big to build the platforms, but I do know that I've got to put either trapdoors in there or like glass pillars to prevent spiders from spawning, and I also know that creepers can die on campfires with hoppers underneath them. At least I've set up other creeper farms like that based on other people's designs, so surely we'll use that in our design, whatever we come up with. I think the more interesting part is going to be all of the sugarcane that we try to figure out inside of here as well. And we've also got some auto crafting that I want to tie into the system. So we farm some sugarcane, we farm some gunpowder, and then we have it all go into some auto crafters and craft up the rockets for us in this universal output. But another thing I want to make sure we do is also output a little bit of gunpowder itself and even sugarcane itself, some that doesn't get sent to the autocrafter. So we'll have to figure out a way to have each go into different sides. Not all into autocrafters, but like some into autocrafters and some into the other sides. You get the idea. Like I said, what's the worst that could happen? All right, so we're inside the spire. I've got a little bit of a setup over here to the side where we've got, things that we might use. And then, of course, the redstone shulker that we set up previously. And I'm hoping this would be everything that we might need, at least for most of what we're going to build here. And I'm thinking what we're going to do is use a bunch of the stone here for our platforms. I'm probably going to go ahead and go towards the center of the spire here for where we do the creeper farm. And then from here, I'll try to raise it up high enough that we can do a collection system and maybe some auto crafting that combines with all of the sugarcane that comes in. And I'm honestly thinking, like, with us wanting to do both types of farms around here, I might try to set it up in a way that we have the creeper farm in the middle, and then around the outer edges of the creeper farm, we have like a sugarcane setup that kind of acts as the walls of the creeper farm. That might be crazy. Maybe it's not all combined into one, but, wrap the sugarcane around the edges and then have the creeper farm in the middle or something like that. And then, of course, we'll want a gap to where we can go put ourselves way up at the top when we need to gather some gunpowder or just let the sugarcane farm run. We can just kind of sit up there and let it do its thing. So we'll probably have it towards the bottom of the tower here, and that's also where we have the most room, so that should work. I've got a platform set up a little bit up in the air with our little catch system down there with the campfires, a couple hoppers down below just to kind of act as the bottom of this farm, and we'll kind of work our way up. So I'm thinking we'll have the first platform here. We're like 5 or 7 blocks above that down there. I think that should be fine. And I think the scale of what we do here is pretty much just going to be determined by how far water can flow. And I want to say off the top of my head, it's like 7, maybe 8 blocks. So what I'm going to do here is try, I guess, 8 to begin with out in each direction, and then make like a diamond shape out of it, connecting it on the corners, with the idea that the water would be poured right here where the torch is, and we would want it to go all the way to the edges without flowing over. So let's see how that looks. Platform built, I've moved the torches along to the edges so that you could see a little bit better. We're gonna go ahead and place our water right here in the middle, and I'm in third person so we can see this a little bit better. Hopefully we don't flood everything down below. Okay, so 8 blocks was good. That was the safe bet. Looks like we can go down to 7. We'll just trim this one layer out from all of the edges over here, and once we do that, the water will cover the entire platform. From there, we know we have this scale good, and we can build multiple platforms going up. All right, the edges have been shrunk down, and one thing we do still need to figure out as we go up is the combination of observer and dispenser for our water output. Now, we know we want the water to output onto this block right here, which means we want the dispenser to be facing downward, and I think we can do that by... Nope, I need to place it upside down. So if I just get some blocks there temporarily, and then I do that, we have our dispenser facing downwards. So now... when it triggers, you can see the hole of the dispenser right there. It'll dispense right here in the middle, and we'll be good. And then from there, we just need an observer to power it facing up. And this is going to kind of link into the other signals. This is the creeper farm that I've built the most frequently. I couldn't tell you who initially designed it like this. All I know is that we can chain these together going all the way up to the top, and the top floor will set off the next floor, which sets off the next floor, all the way down to the bottom, and that's how the water will toggle, whether it's dispensing it or picking it back up. Either way, we want the observer to be facing up, so this time we also need another block up above. We do that, and now we can use this as a bit of an example. So the floor is going to be in line with the observer right here. The next floor, we're going to have some trapdoors down here to lower the height just a little bit so that creepers can spawn, but not other stuff. And what's going to happen is when the water above this floor gets dispensed, it's going to tell the observer that that happened, and that is going to dispense this floor. Or when it's doing the other part of the cycle, it will instead pick up the water instead of dispensing it. So all we've got to do is repeat this process for as many floors as we feel like building, and I honestly have no idea what number of floors to go for. I don't know anything about the distance and spawning and anything like that, but 10 floors feels like a good number, so surely we just go with 10 and call it good? I wouldn't imagine it's too little. If anything, maybe it's a few too many, but either way, it should work. Oh, I almost forgot. We've also got to do the glass pillars to prevent the spiders from spawning. And you know what? We could do glass pillars. Maybe carpet would also work. Wait. Don't yell at me. Carpet's water. I know, I got it. It clicked. Don't yell. Stop typing. Stop it. We just need to do it in a pattern that spiders don't spawn. And if I'm not mistaken, spiders can spawn in any open 2x2 space. So we need to figure out a pattern that gets rid of any uninterrupted 2x2 squares, and I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but I'm gonna rack my brain for the next 2 hours straight and come up with something. Also, I resorted to looking it up. It's any 3x1x3 space, which does make this a little bit easier. I am, however, a little bit concerned about having glass pillars here with water flow, because the water will flow into the glass and then not past it. So surely that would mean that there would be mobs that just wouldn't fall when that happens because the water wouldn't push them all the way. And whatever the case, we're building it, so it'll work perfectly. Okay, I think I have something that should do the trick. Now, it's a little complicated. It's a little weird. Bear with me here, though. I think where we have the glass pillars should work. I was looking for any 3x1x3 spaces except for the middle, which maybe is an exception, mostly because we're gonna always have water going and not going, and there's also this block, which is kind of up here. I don't know, the wiki said something about no full solid block above it, the spawning spot, so maybe that would stop it. Either way, I just kind of set this glass out in a pattern where I kind of went like 1, 2, and then like a little to the side. I felt like if it was straight on from the dispenser at any point, it might really block the flow of water. But this way, it would kind of help the flow continue to do its thing all the way to the edges. So I just went 1, 2 into the side, and 1, 2 into the side, and 1, 2 into the side. And then from these glass blocks right here, I kind of did the same thing, but an extra block to kind of get this pattern that I could repeat. So 2 blocks, and then, you know, on the diagonal, 2 blocks, and then on the diagonal. You kind of get the idea. That did leave us with some close calls on the corners, to which I am guessing if I just put some glass on the edges, just nothing will spawn there. So like this won't spawn creepers either, but at least it won't spawn spiders. It's not necessarily that these were 3x3 areas. There is one on each side, But this extra piece of glass, it was close. It was like 3 by 3 minus one corner, so I didn't trust it. So I just threw an extra glass in there in case, just to be safe. At the end of the day, it's not the biggest deal if spiders are caught in the system here and it's a spider and creeper farm. But if we can keep it to creepers just to make it a little more effective, all the better. So I think we've got the tileable platform design at this point. We just need to throw some trapdoors up here. And what this does is make the room a little shorter than 2 blocks so that we don't get skeletons and zombies and all of those sorts of things, because we just want creepers. I think we are now ready to replicate this all the way up. And just to show you real quick that the water does work around all of these pillars, it does go all the way to the edges. And I haven't tested my theory as to, you know, if I blocked a straight line right here, would it prevent it? But I guess I won't need to. Looks like we got something that works. All right, we're at the top of the farm. I've got 10 layers in place, fully done, and boy, did it take a lot of trapdoors. The next thing we need to worry about is what is right behind me. We've got to figure out how to power this and get it on a timer. So as far as I'm aware, it can be a pretty simple, like, just loop it through a bunch of repeaters or something. I don't know how long we want it to run. We'll just kind of have to eyeball it and see how long the water lasts for before it gets picked up and then goes again. We'll probably just eyeball it and go with whatever feels good. But in terms of being able to turn it on or off, that might be where I run into a little bit of a problem. I'm imagining I can probably just hook the signal up to a block that, if powered with like a lever or so, will allow the signal to continue to cycle through. Sounds easy on paper. I probably will struggle to do that, but let me see what I can manage. All right, I've come up with something that is pretty simple and seems to do the trick. I basically just borrowed what I had found on the sheep farm with redstone torch shenanigans and the way that you can kind of use those into a line to make it do a thing. So when it's powered, it's off, and when it's not powered, it'll run. Now, I left a little bit of leeway here in case we want to extend the signal. I can just throw more repeaters in here, I guess. I suppose I could have maybe tried some things with like hopper clocks or something, but that felt like a little unnecessary, a little overkill for this. So I just spammed a bunch of repeaters down here. Also, yes, I changed the ground we're on. I ran out of stone. I wonder why that is. But this seems to do the trick. Now, all we need to do is put the water in place, and then we can test it out with the water flowing to see if it's ample time with water and then without water, and if we need to add any more to the line. All right, it's a little bit dark, so you might have to look a little closely, but we're gonna go ahead and turn this on. I've got all the water in place, and we are gonna see how we feel about how it's running. I'm gonna get down here a little bit. I don't expect anything to actually be spawning at the moment, but we're just gonna see how it functions. And there it goes. Now it's, okay, that's a lot of trapdoors, and the trapdoors, okay, yep, yep, I was ready for that to happen. I think that, okay, I think we put more repeaters. I think we make it all repeaters, even if there's no delay, and that'll fix that from happening. Anytime the dispenser gets powered, I guess it's flicking the immediate trapdoors, which is probably not a problem. Man, there's a lot of trapdoors going off. Okay, well, one big problem was that I just had it going over a redstone dust over the observer. It didn't click in my mind that I don't need to power the observer because, I don't know if you guys knew this, but it was observing. And so, I've got a bunch of trapdoors flipping here because I accidentally just hit the repeater. The problem is that we were getting 2 signals rapidly after one another whenever it would go over our center block right here. So it would trigger and then instantly trigger again. And I think that's why we heard so much trapdoor spam, as well as why all of the water keeps getting off sequence. So now I need to go fix this again, get it all on sequence, and then we're going to try it now that I just have a repeater going across. So even though it's not delayed or anything, once the signal crosses, the observer will detect it, send the line down, and only one thing all the way down before it loops back around, and then we can properly see from there. All right, I think we're finally ready to give this a go. Fingers crossed when we flick this lever that it's going to do what we want it to do. Okay, I'm not hearing trapdoor spam. I'm just going to sit right here. We got the water. Oh, okay. We're still getting trapdoors. I might need to get rid of the trapdoors, and we're instantly off sequence. The trapdoors have to do something with these getting off sequence, right? Surely? Maybe some of the observers are weird. Well, no, because they're still triggering at some point. It's not like they go off once and then never go again. It's just this weird, like, some are cooperating and some are not. I really don't know what's going on. Okay, I've done a little bit of testing, and I think I've discovered one of the issues, and some of you guys who are more Redstone inclined, you might have been yelling this at your monitor the whole time. When we have water, it sends off the signal just once, and that's fine through the observer, but when the water clears, it pulses multiple times frequently. So that is basically, if I'm understanding correctly, when the water's flowing freely and then it gets retracted, it doesn't instantly go. It has multiple levels it goes through. Each one of those is sending a tick through the observer. Now, how we go about changing that is beyond me at the moment. I'm not entirely sure what we do if not observers trying to keep track of everything that goes on. I'm just trying to think what else we could use, or if there's a way to get around the water. That would explain why the water's kind of going on and off and on and off a bunch of times on each layer and setting them off. And that would also be why the trapdoors spam instead of just going off like one flip. So I've been thinking for a little bit. I wonder if we switch around how we have the dispensers and observers. We currently have, I'm on the bottom floor, but we currently have all of the observers in the floor, and then the dispensers are pointing down from the ceiling right onto where the observer's facing. I almost wonder how it would be if we put the dispensers in the floor facing upward, and then we take the observers, and instead of having the observers face where the water is, the observer just faces the dispenser, which only clicks once. So if we're from the top, the signal goes into an observer immediately, which then powers like this air block. Technically, like if this is the bottom of the observer, it would power this area, but there's a dispenser there, and it gets that power to the dispenser, which clicks this off. And then when the cycle goes back through, it triggers it again, so it picks the water up. That kind of thing. Maybe that could be a solution. I'm just wondering if that would work, because we wouldn't have the observer, we wouldn't have the dispenser one block above the ground. It would be flush, and the observer would be where this block is right here. So could that signal travel across that distance right there? I feel like it wouldn't, but like I also feel like it might make sense. We'll give it a go. All right, I'm back up top. I've gone ahead and made the switch on every single floor. We are now going to see how this functions with the switch that we just made. Now we have the dispensers in the floor, and the observers are the elevated block / what's in the ceiling. So we're waiting for, there's the second cycle right there. Do we feel like this is long enough for the water to be flowing to push anything off of the edges? Yeah, I think so. And long enough of a gap between water for things to spawn. Like, if anything, we could add a couple more ticks. It does look like it's working right, though. Every single floor has water at the same time, or removes at the same time, so we got that working. That seems to be good. And then I think this block right here is our detection. So if I just flip a couple of these to delay it just a little bit more, that's not even that much. We could just go ahead and do this on all of them, and then just have our middle block right there. I don't want to spam that to cause any more problems. I really need to light up some of these areas around here, but I think we've got something that is doing what we needed to do. And I've already seen some creepers spawn and get pushed down in some of the testing and everything, so there's probably already some gunpowder forming. Yes, I have seen a spider or two. It's fine. We'll deal with it. It's not the end of the world, but I think this is good. We got the creeper farm in place. This will work. So this is where I'm going to need your help. How far away do I need to be up in the sky for this farm to work appropriately? We've got 10 layers of spawnable platforms for the creepers, and then they fall, and then they go into the campfires, and then into the hoppers from there. But I know there's probably a prime distance above this in height. I don't know if it's like 20 blocks, 30 blocks, 50 blocks, 100 blocks. I don't know. We're in an ocean right now where we built this kind of man-made island. What is the optimal distance? You'll have to let me know. We got plenty of space, so that's not a concern. We'll figure something out. I think the roof up there is maybe 15 blocks away from world height or something like that. It's pretty far up there, so we've got a lot of room to play with. And best of all, we've set ourselves up nicely to get the sugarcane farm built around the outside of this platform. Well, I'm in the underbelly of our setup right here, trying to do a little bit of redstone wiring. I've got one half of our sugarcane output coming down that tube right there, and then feeding through all of our hoppers into this convoluted mess. The other half is going to shoot out of there, and that's going to be the sugarcane that we just keep as sugarcane. I figured if we split it half and half, that'll give us a good split for what we put into rockets and then what we keep for other stuff. Now, I'm running into a bit of an issue here. The first line that everything runs into is the autocrafter for the paper specifically, and that works simple enough because it's just sugarcane going into the system. Once it gets, you know, all three in there and it's ready to craft, the signal strength is long enough that it will power the autocrafter to send it into the barrel, and then the barrel takes it to the next phase, which is here. Now, here's where the problem is. This one is supposed to take paper from there and some of the gunpowder from the creeper farm. As a matter of fact, it's going to take 2/3 of the hopper's worth of gunpowder out of the creeper farm. This last one's going to go to our just gunpowder profit itself. But the goal is to have gunpowder come through here and then fill one of the spaces so that we have paper and gunpowder, which would make rockets. Now, the problem lies in that if we get enough paper at a time, or enough gunpowder at a time, without getting the other, it's just going to fill both of the spaces with that same item. I don't know how to make it not fill both spaces with the same item. Like, I want to specify that paper goes in one, gunpowder goes in the other, make rocket. And unfortunately, it's not going to be that easy for us. There's not like a clear setting that we can set for that. It's not like we can predetermine what items to put in here. At least if there is, I don't know about it. I tried having like stacks of each of these items in here, and it didn't change the signal strength that the comparator would put out. That was my best guess. So now I'm thinking it's got to get a lot more complicated. Something like having hoppers locked and then unlocking both sides at the same rate or something like that to get it to actually craft the rockets properly to then feed into our storage system there. So I am well and truly stumped on this one, and I am very much going to need your guys' input in the comments down below, especially those of you guys who've done stuff like this before. How can I make this do what I need it to do? Again, I'm trying to do redstone in this world without following tutorials directly, but give me all the information that you got on it, how things work, what kinds of things I might need to introduce to the system to make this possible so that we can have the rockets auto-craft, because I feel like it would be really cool to be able to use the crafter to do that. Fortunately, for now, until we get it figured out, what I can do is just go ahead and break these couple of blocks right here, and then just have everything feed into there. It'll be half gunpowder and half paper, which itself is auto-crafting just fine, so at least there's that. I can just take everything out of there and craft it right away without needing a crafting table. Fortunately, the other side is super easy and simple, just a little hopper chain with a bunch of composters to try and reduce the lag, you know me, barrels and all of that kind of stuff. So really tall tower right here. I don't know if I'm gonna dress up the inside of here. Maybe at some point. Could be kind of fun to throw something in here. Not too sure. But either way, we've got 3 of the hoppers from the creeper output and kind of also spider output going into here. And we've got 1/2 of our sugarcane setup going into here. And that's, of course, just raw sugarcane. That's not getting auto-crafted into anything at all. So we can kind of get this combination of all 3 of these. We've got the raw outputs, and then we've got the combo output, which somehow also has string. I guess we're spawning some more spiders than I initially thought. But for now, it'll just be paper and gunpowder, and then if we can figure out how to get the rockets to work properly with the autocrafter without messing up or clogging the system, then we'll have it do that long term. And if I ever need less rockets and more pure gunpowder, I can always just rotate that hopper right there around so that it faces that way, and then we'll put 6 of them on that side and 3 of them on this side, so we can kind of have that change depending. So I'm up here on the sugarcane setup, and I was about to walk you guys through what I built here when it occurred to me that I have put all of this glowstone in this build to look all nice and good and light up the sugarcane, only for it to then also light up the creeper platforms so that nothing is spawning on the bottom couple of layers. You know, just when I think it's not possible to make any more obvious mistakes, I somehow manage to line my creeper farm in glowstone. I sat here and thought about it for a little bit, and I think the solution is tinted glass so that we can have glass next to the farm and see both sides. Not that we'll be in here very frequently, but it looks cool. I want to do it. So tinted glass, but I don't have the amethyst for that. So we're just gonna call these bottom 2 layers a bust for now, and eventually I'll get some amethyst and fix it. So anyway, the farm that we've got set up here, I went for something pretty simple, but I wanted to go for something that felt pretty cool in terms of how it functions. So we've got 2 layers of sugarcane. I kind of split it up into like 5 by 7 by 5, and I did that on each of the sides. 2 of them are orange, 2 of them are cyan to kind of go with our colors. And I still need to finish planting a little bit over on this side right here. But it's pretty simple. The sugarcane will grow up. I didn't want to use too many observers because they're very expensive, so I just did 2 per little pocket of these, I guess. So whenever one of the 2 in front of the dispensers grows, it's going to send all of the pistons across off, and that will be a little handful of sugarcane. That drops down into our ice tracks down here with the water, and that'll come from both layers, of course, as any of them get done. They'll shoot off to here. This side will continue all the way down, and this right here is our rocket output. So these would go towards the autocrafters and get turned into paper. And then these 2 sides over here, same exact process around the corner, and the output down here is just pure sugarcane, not auto-crafted into anything at all, and that's where that would output. So we have kind of one corner of it doing one thing, and the other corner of it doing the other thing. As I was building this, without thinking about light levels or anything, I thought it would be kind of cool to mix in the cyan, the orange, and then a little bit of glowstone as we went, and then have big glass walls here so that both farms were kind of merged into one. I just felt like that would be kind of a creative way to go about it. But of course, we have the light level issue, so I guess I got some amethyst to gather to fix this in the future. Regardless, I'm pretty happy with how this is all coming together. It looks like it's storming outside. That was kind of crazy. We got the creeper spawning. I've had some gunpowder come in. We've had some sugarcane make its way down as well. Still don't know where to build a proper, like, AFK run the machine platform at, so don't forget to let me know about that as well. But I think we accomplished some at least halfway decent redstone today. Today, we're setting our sights in a different direction. Over the past couple of episodes here, we've gone across the bridge, across the river, and off into that direction over yonder. We built this spire, and we connected it with a bridge. Not only that, but we built a creeper and sugarcane hybrid farm thing inside as well. But it's time for us to return to this side of the river, at least for what I want to get done today. But what we're going to do today doesn't include this area with our trees and our path and our house. None of this. Instead, we are going to turn our attention over to this region over here. And we're actually going to go further than where we can see right now, beyond the fog and beyond this body of water. If you've been keeping up with the episodes up to this point, you'll know that this side of the river where we have our house and our trees and everything beyond this place, as long as we don't cross the threshold of our little pine forest, is our fantasy area. And what that means is that everything that we build off in this direction is going to fall more in the line of the fantasy element of things as opposed to any other theme or style. Now that'll get pretty broad. We'll mix it up with a good amount of different fantasy things. A lot of it will be naturey and overgrown. Other times it'll be more architecturally fantasy and getting some really crazy rooftops and colors and all of that in the building. We'll try to mix in a broad range of fantasy themes to really make this area of the world pop. In the past couple of episodes, we've turned our attention over to the medieval side, across the river and across that bridge, and with the medieval side, it's a lot more of a dark, grim, ominous sort of medieval, that very Souls game and Elden Ring style like I explained when we built the spire. The idea is to have the three main areas of this land contrast each other pretty nicely. Now that third area is still a surprise. I'm still holding on to that one for just a little bit longer. But over here in the fantasy area, outside of the starting builds, we haven't really done anything. So I think today we're gonna change that. I've chosen this area over here as a start because I think it is the area that lends itself the best to what I envision this area turning into. The biggest factor for that was having this hill right here that we can work off of. This area is going to eventually include a good bit of custom terrain, and it'll be off to the right over here from where we're going to be building a couple structures down in this area. Another part of it was the fact that we already have some water going on over here. There's this weird broken up river that's trying to connect to a body of water over there, as well as a body of water over there. And I think we'll be playing around a lot with changing up this water and trying to get it to look just right. There is, of course, this village over here as well, and there's no telling what's going to happen with that village, but I'm not too concerned about it. We've already got our villagers set up back at base as well, so I'm not too worried about if the villagers survive or anything like that, and at the end of the day, it might all get torn down anyway. But before we can really get to building some of the structures that I want to put out in this area, it's going to require a lot of terraforming to get it to look just right. A lot of this area down here is going to get turned into somewhat of a marshy, sort of very overgrown sort of vibe. And if you've been keeping up with the stuff that we're doing outside of just the main videos here, you'll know that we've been doing a little bit of building in that style. Specifically on special streams where I get together with some creator friends of mine and we put together a build to be featured in this world. I've done 2 of those streams so far, and both of those builds kind of combine into one larger area, of which I'm going to add on to a big part myself at the very end. Today, I want to start putting all of those builds together, and I think this area right here is going to be the perfect spot to do so. To get us started though, we've got some terraforming to do, and I brought some beacons. I mentioned how I want this area to turn into a little bit of a marsh, or kind of have that feel to it. The centerpiece of what we're building here is going to be a little witch's cabin, and I want it to feel like it's on the water. Not necessarily in the middle of the water and hard to get to, but I want to position it in a way that there's water on almost every side of it to really feel like it is the centerpiece of this little grove or marshy swampland kind of area. So alongside getting rid of a lot of the elevation here, cutting out some of the hills and making the terrain a little easier to work with, we're also going to bring the water in quite a bit as well. We're going to take the natural river that flows by this area, and I'm going to connect it to what would otherwise be a pretty large pond. I think that'll be a great way to help sell the marshy kind of style, and it'll give us a little bit of land, almost like a peninsula that kind of shoots out between parts of the water in the pond and also the river, and it's on that little piece of land where we'll end up building the little witch hut. I say little and hut, but that's not entirely accurate. It's a decent sized building. It's more of a cabin, but you'll see as we get there. I I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do with the terrain, so to start off with, I just decided that I was going to completely flatten all of it, and then I would go back through after the fact and get all of the slopes and terrain blending and all of that figured out, which does take a little bit longer than if I just started off by blending the hills into where I wanted, but as I couldn't make my mind up, this was the route I decided to take, and so it took a little extra time, but at the end of the day, we're still able to achieve what we're going for here, and that's the most important part. Okay, after a good amount of digging, and much more than I was initially anticipating, we've got this area looking a lot better for our purposes. The biggest thing, like I mentioned a little bit ago, was tying this river into another body of water that can kind of meander over here and fill a lot of this space. Now, for the river itself, maybe widening it a little bit here and there is something that we might look at doing down the road, but for now, I figured we would leave most of it intact and really just focus on this area right here because there's going to be a lot of time required. Hello, chicken. To get this area complete and get everything put in that I want to do, because there's quite a lot to it, from the actual main structure itself to a lot of the surrounding details, and then a really big piece that will tie it all together. One area that I didn't focus too much on yet was this area right here, and it's because we're gonna put a little bit of a cliff face right over here. It's not gonna be very tall, but just a little bit to kind of accent over a little traveled roadway that we're gonna have lead into this area from over in this tiny little valley right here between the big plateau and this little hill. We're going to kind of have the way in meander through here, and that'll open up to the viewpoint of the house on the water, of course, and then some of the accenting details, and then the big overarching piece, which will come later. So I didn't touch any of that yet. I figured we would save the cliff face for some of the next things that we start to work on. But for now, I need to make sure that we've got enough stuff to start building on all of this. It's going to require so many different little things, little details, bits and bobs, because the builds that we're going to put in here that I've collabed with some others on were very detailed and had a lot of different pieces to them. So it's going to be a lot of gathering. And luckily, it's not going to require too much stone because we kind of just used it all. While you watch me gather some stuff, I've got some fun facts for you guys who are interested in little stats and things like that for the world. As of the time of recording this right here, we are currently on day 1086 in this world. The wood I've chopped the most is acacia at 6,096 times. I've broken 5 diamond shovels and 4 diamond pickaxes. I've traded for 11,714 emeralds. I've slept in a bed 933 times, and the total time played is 9.25 days. All right, I've got a similar setup over here to what we had when we built the spire and the bridge that connected it, and you might have seen this a little bit in some of the time lapse earlier on, but I think at this point I filled it up enough that it should take care of what we need. For some things I got a little bit extra, and for other things I tried to get just about the amount that I thought we would use, and I tried to pre-prep everything into stairs and slabs and fences and trapdoors and all of the different little combinations that we might need. And then of course we've got one miscellaneous barrel that's just all kinds of hoopla that will all eventually get used in what we're going to put together here. So you can see I wasn't kidding when I said there's a lot of random different blocks here and there that all add up to the greater picture. So before we actually get started on these builds, I want to bring some attention to the creators that I collabed with to make these happen. During the 2 streams that I did, and for the future streams that I plan to do as well for collabs for this world, not only did we get together and put our minds to a build that's survival friendly that can go into this world and fit what we're going for, but I also wanted to showcase that person as a builder as well, and how they approach building in some of the techniques and methods that they like to use, as well as some of the things that they think about when they are building. And so something I want to be able to do in episodes like this, where we're putting together some of the collab builds that we've done, is show off a little bit of their mindset. Hello. Is to show off a little bit of their mindset is to show off a little bit of their mindset when it comes to building and some of the things that they like to do, as well as some of the insight that they provided me and those of you guys who were watching the stream at the time. So the first collab we did was the actual witch house itself, and I did that with InfiniteDrift. I've known Drift for a while at this point, and this was the first time that we got to collab on something. And I'd say that Drift is definitely most well known for building in a really cozy sort of cottagecore aesthetic for the most part. We're talking some smaller builds, but the detail level is kind of off the charts. Lots of little details here and there, no block left unturned sort of a style. And I really like it because I don't think I've ever seen a drift build that wasn't super inviting and super cozy. Here's a couple of clips from that stream as well. Are you able to show any of these on your end?
Probably not. That's why I keep directing everybody to your stream.
Fair enough.
Acrylic stream is better, by the way. So just go there and make sure you sub.
It gets to a point. Why are you guys even watching me? Like, honestly.
Yeah, what are you doing here? What are you doing on my stream?
This one right here, I don't know why, but when I saw this, it just looked like a cake. You know what I mean? Like the cakes that don't look like cakes.
Oh yeah, you know what? It's the AI like smoothness of it.
Yeah, that's really what it is. Cause I saw this and I don't know why. My first thought was, dude, I want to take a bite of that.
Dude, okay, for some reason, nothing makes me more angry than is it cake reels and TikToks, because I'm like, it just like infuriates me. I'm like, what is the point of this? But then I always watch it, you know?
Yeah. I always watch it and I'm like, yeah, I'd eat it. You know?
Yes, I'd take a bite. I would.
I'd take a bite out of that, yeah.
I just picture that, like, I don't know, like a witch using a certain type of ingredient, and then somehow it just like got overgrown into their house, and they were just like, well, guess this is my life now.
It tried to brew something up and then gave up on it and just like, you know, opened the back door and just like, you know, slung it into the grass and was like, get rid of it. And then like didn't realize that all of a sudden, like now you have this big thing that sprouted up from it.
Exactly. What do you think they were trying to brew? I think they were trying to like reinvent Dr. Pepper, like their own version.
They wanted to add a 24th spice to it, but it was too many. 23 was the right number. Yeah, the mushroom is actually the 24th spice. That keeps Dr. Pepper at 23.
That's the lore.
I think that's a good shape. That's a good size pond. What do you guys think? It's like a tooth. It's kind of a tooth, a little bit. Or it is Yoshi. This is Yoshi eating the house. Do you see where I am? Really high above.
Oh, you are very high above.
If you come up here and then you look down at the water.
Yep.
Tell me that's not Yoshi eating the house.
Yoshi! You know what they say, if you never try, you never know, and if you never know, you never try.
Who said that? So, double layer glass panes gives you that line in the middle.
Oh, what the heck?
You get these windows, which are like smaller glass panes, you know?
It looks like real window.
Yeah. I
see it.
You just put glass panes behind glass panes. Now, like,
wait, what?
I did normal glass panes behind light gray. So, like, if you offset the color, it works better.
Oh, that is so smart.
Hey, if you've been enjoying the series so far, don't forget to subscribe to make sure that these get sent to you a little more often as they get uploaded. 79% of everyone who's watching this right now is not subscribed. And hey, at the end of the day, if you change your mind later, you can always undo it. So, of course, huge shout out to Drift for joining me and being the first to collab here for the Inspire world. And you guys should absolutely go watch some Drift videos because that's some of the best Minecraft content out there right now. And now that you've seen some of the fun parts of the stream, it's time for us to try and get this witch hut built. All right, we've got the main piece of this area built, and I've got to say, now that I've got it actually in the world with some of the surroundings in place, it is looking even better than when Drift and I originally put it together. If we just stand here and take a little bit of a close-up, you can kind of see some of the things that we went for, but namely, we tried to incorporate that signature Drift style of no block left unturned. There's detail everywhere you look. At every single opportunity that presented itself to have some detail, we made sure to include it in there. And of course, in some of those clips, you saw the reference image that we were using as a little bit of inspiration for the style that we wanted to go for. Now, there's some unique things that we did with the build here. Namely, it's on the water, and so we decided to include a couple of these big rocks or mossy boulders that are included around the base of the building, and then included a little bit of glassy water right here as a little stream kind of rushing over these rocks and into the rest of the water right there. It's not perfect, but at the end of the day, at a glance, it sort of feels like it's water starting to kind of rush down the side of these rocks right here, and that's exactly what it's supposed to do. So I think we've accomplished something really good with small details like that. Of course, you have a lot of the usual stuff. We've got some plants everywhere. We've got some lanterns, some fences, and trapdoors that just kind of help accent everything. And of course, because this is supposed to be some sort of witch cottage, we definitely wanted to lean into the naturey, overgrown feel. So we have a lot of plant life, a lot of leaves and glowberries and hanging roots and all of those sorts of things in and around the building itself. And then of course we've got the huge mushroom growing up the back of the house, the 24th Dr. Pepper spice, if you will, which is meant to be this weird sort of mushroom of gray and like cyan colorations, but it's kind of been converted a little bit into this sort of like chimney in a way. Like we have these growths that are supporting the cap of the mushroom, but the cap doesn't connect to the base of it like it would normally. Instead, this is kind of where some of the smoke or steam or whatever would sort of dissipate out the sides on each of these little toppings right here. I'm not too sure if I want to try and replicate the smoke that would be going up here. If we did, it would probably be with glass and glass panes, something of that sort. So you guys will have to let me know down below if you'd like to see us add some smoke to it, or if you think it's fine as is. There were a few different techniques that we played around with when building this. For one, shading the mushroom right here, we've got a mix of muddy mangrove roots in the darkest areas into cobbled deep slate. And then we've got gray wool, and then a little bit of cyan terracotta around the edges, just where it might be the brightest. And then we did something similar up on the rooftop as well. Being the roof was green, we didn't have any stairs or slabs or walls to really work with, so we had to keep it to just full blocks, which of course gets a little bit tricky with how bulky they can be sometimes. But given the blocks that we were put in, I think we did pretty good, and some of the shading that we used really helped sell it. There's a mix of moss and green wool, green terracotta, green concrete, there's lime terracotta. We've got a whole range of green blocks up here to try and sell the different patches of color and shading, and it's not necessarily the same style of shading in regards to where the sun might be shining the most or the least. Sometimes it applies a little bit, but for the most part, it was to try and get some big splotchy texture in there to really help break up the roof and sell it a little bit better. We do have this very nice dock out to the side overlooking this little part of the pond, and that of course is using a lot of campfires and trapdoors, a pretty typical sort of dock design. And as for how you actually get up and into the building, I think what we'll eventually do is have the pathway kind of round its way up here, and then we'll have a connecting piece up into this little boardwalk area, this little porch. And then from here, you'll be up onto the side of the house. We've got a doorway right here. And if you walk all the way around a little bit over the rocks and water, we've got another doorway right here, which doesn't really connect to anything too crazy. This is meant to be the front door, but I think what it's going to end up being is just this cool aesthetic porch where you can kind of access it from the inside, but not really anywhere else. And you've got this nice view of the area that will eventually be built up around it. A couple of details that I do want to make sure that I cover are the windows, of course. You saw that in one of the clips that I showed, where if you double layer some glass panes, especially if you get two different types of glass panes, like we have regular on the back side and then light gray in front of it, you get these smaller glass panes that kind of form. And of course, this is one of those details where you have to sacrifice a lot of interior space to make it work. but it can look pretty good at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, this isn't a build that I currently intend on using the interior for. It's kind of a mess. We'll just act like it's not there, but at least the build does have a back to it. And the other detail that I wanted to mention is all the honey and honeycomb that you can see through the windows. One of the details that Drift and I had talked a lot about when putting this together was the feeling of an interior being warm and inviting in a way, and doing that without using shaders. Now, that can get a little bit tricky in the base game because lighting works a little strangely. But what we decided on was using a mix of honey and honeycomb behind these windows, and every so often we would put some shroom lights back there as well. And what that would do would get these yellows and oranges, and especially from a distance, make the interior feel like it's warmly lit and give you that inviting sort of feel to it. Where there are shroom lights, it'll light it up a little bit better, and where there aren't, it'll be a little bit darker, but you'll still have that golden tint. So if we stand all the way back here and you just see that golden tint from a glance or from a distance, it just sells it that little bit extra, because for most of the areas in which you're going to be seeing this house, you're not going to be that close. It's just going to be at a glimpse, and you're only going to see a little bit of these smaller details here and there. You wouldn't even know that it's honey or honeycomb that you're looking at unless you got a lot closer and really started to study the place. I think that's a really cool detail, and I definitely want to start to incorporate that some more in builds that I do. I think the last most notable detail to go over is the fact that the entire foundation of the house is on these stilts. Now, the stilts aren't that big, but if I come down here, you can see all the way beyond the house over there. This slab level right here is actually what the whole thing sits on. And that's to kind of flow with that marshy sort of theme that we're going for right here. We've got the river coming in from behind and swooping over to the distance that way. And then, of course, we've got it turning into this pond right here. We've mixed in a lot of mud. It gets pretty shallow. And, of course, I tried to help sell that with a lot of grass and leaves, especially mangrove leaves around the base of it. And I figured if we're going to do a house in an area like this, putting it on stilts like this would make the most sense to give it that extra structural integrity, given the land that it's on is definitely not the most stable. All in all, for this area, this is a really, really good start for us. And the second collab that we did, I think I'm going to feature in the next episode, involves a lot of the build up to this area, a lot of this area over here. And I think once we get that in place in combination with the first build that we did right here, we'll be setting ourselves up really nicely to cap it all off with the biggest piece of this whole picture right here, which is going to loom overhead from over on that plateau to the right and take up a lot of this space up here. I'm really excited to get that one done. That one's going to be the biggest build since the spire, and it's definitely going to be one of the centerpieces of the fantasy area of this world. It just so happens that it's going to have some other accenting builds down and around it to really help sell the whole picture. And speaking of things that need to get done to this area, this village is becoming a bit of an eyesore, so I think we need to get rid of it. And that's looking a lot better. Village gone, and it took me quite a while to actually get rid of all of the pathways and replace them with dirt and grass again and let the grass grow over a little bit. That was definitely a little bit tedious, but we're looking a lot better now that there's not a big village in the way, and there's a couple stragglers, some villagers that are just kind of loose and walking around, and maybe an iron golem as well, but they'll probably be fine, right? There's some caves around here that they can hide in. A horse to ride away, maybe? Oh, there's a couple of them up there. Don't even worry about it. They're already on their way to build another village somewhere else, and nothing bad will befall those guys whatsoever. I mentioned how I want to save the second part of this collab build area for in the next episode. Now that we've got this first one done, there is a little bit of an update I've got for you guys. In the previous episode here in the Ascendant Spire, we built this little combo of a creeper farm and sugarcane farm that all kind of came together. Now, for one, I've got the tinted glass in place. I mentioned I would need to fix that after I realized that I lit up half of the farm after I had built the sugarcane farm. That problem was solved nice and easy. Now, the other part we had to deal with involved the auto-crafting of rockets, and long story short, I've got it working at this point. I spent a lot of time on stream with much of you guys troubleshooting and trying to learn all of the little redstone things to make this work, and there was a couple of mechanics that I learned for the very first time. Namely, I built my first AND gate, and we didn't have to use a tutorial, although it did take me like an hour and a half to figure out how some of this works. I'm really slow with redstone, but that's okay because at the end of the day, we got it working, and it's kind of an inverted version, but effectively it came down to needing to lock both of these hoppers unless they are both ready to output, this one for paper, of course, and this one for gunpowder. And it's a combination of that as well as having a stack of each item in here so that we never end up accidentally having two of the same. And that's kind of where it gets a little imperfect, but at the end of the day, it's all right and works well enough. So for the gunpowder that outputs into the rockets, I've got it going through an item filter right here to filter out all of the string and bones and spider eyes and arrows that we get from the occasional non-creeper that spawns. That way we don't accidentally clog the auto-crafter with non-gunpowder, of course. That goes all the way over here where I've built my first mini dropper vader. I did not realize that you can dropper an item directly into another dropper, so I learned that for the first time. That was kind of crazy. And then, of course, it just sends everything up and over and into the crafter. And some of the tricky bits that we had to manage here was powering the auto crafter not based on how full it was. You can actually see some remnants right here of when I was powering it that way. I just got rid of the comparator. But instead power it based on the line that unlocks the hopper. So this is set to go off on the occasional tick. We've got it at just the right delay, and when that happens, we also have it craft on a bit of a delay. That's what this wire is up here, and that's what prevents it from going so fast that we get extra pieces in here from one side or the other when there are a lot more of one item versus the other item. That in combination with the fact that it's not reading and crafting based on items being in here, but rather it's telling the crafter to operate whenever items are put in through these hoppers right here. At the same time they unlock, they also craft. It's kind of like 1-to-1. The speed is pretty good. And again, it's not perfect, but at the end of the day, it's going to last quite a while before I need to come up here and manually adjust it when, you know, for example, the paper runs all the way out, but it's a very, very slow process in which that number goes down. So the redstone is as good as it's going to get for my standards at the moment. And if you didn't understand a single word that I just said, well, I don't either. So that would make two of us. But I do know that we've got rockets, we've got gunpowder, and we've got sugarcane all coming through these barrels, and I'll take it. I hope you're ready for some terraforming. There's so much that we've got to do around what we built in the last one to really get it to just the right feel that we want to go for. So let's go pay our horse a visit and we'll ride on over there and I can show you what's going on. The last time we were here in this world, we put together this cozy little witch manor over in this area next to where we had found that first village. We're actually pretty close to where our house is set up right behind me over there, and it's just out of visible range once you're all the way over there. But I spent a lot of time talking in the last episode how I want to turn that area into a little bit of this marshy swampland kind of a feel, and it's not going to be too widespread. Like, I'm not going to turn all of this area into something like that, but rather everything just around the house itself, because everything that we do over here, it's all going to be a part of a much larger build, a much larger picture that is going to really be taken up in the sky above it. What we've built here and what we're going to continue building over here all kind of sits underneath that, and it's kind of accenting details to the bigger overall picture. So this little marshy area where everything is really overgrown and watery, all of that is pretty much going to remain just underneath our main centerpiece. And that centerpiece is going to be a huge tree that lingers overhead. And yes, even bigger than the tree that we built back next to the house. Quite a bit, actually. But that's not my focus for right now. That's going to be what we do to cap it all off in this little spot right here. What we really need to start doing is hammering out all of the details around the house that we put together in the last episode so that we can really make it fit in with the surrounding area. Because right now, while it looks just fine and it could work in this context, We've just got these hills over here. We've got this blank plain right here, not even any pieces of grass, and then we just got a normal forest behind it. And sure, this looks fine in that context, but I think once we start to build up the rest of the area around it, this will start to look infinitely better, and it will feel a little more intentional. It'll feel more like it's a part of what's going on around here rather than a bit of an outlier or something that stands out versus all of this normalcy. So the first step to doing that is getting a pathway up to this manor. Now, fortunately for us, I've got a lot of leftover mud and similar type of blocks from when we built the house in the last episode that I think we're ready to just jump into getting the path and some of the terrain built up. And the best part about all of it is that this also includes a collab that I did with another creator. Much like I had done the Witch Manor with Drift in the last episode, a lot of the leading up details and some of the scenery around here, in the name of all of the terraforming, was done with Megiibyte. And we went into that collab with the idea that we were going to create the build up to this house right here that I built with Drift. So it's kind of like a collab within a collab as a part of a collab or something. Either way, I'm excited to get it all in place because I think it turned out really cool, and Megiibyte is very, very good when it comes to nature-y things and terraforming. So we put together something that was really, really fun. But before we get to it, I've got to sleep, and I've got a couple of clips from that stream to show you guys. Just kidding, I kind of messed things up when I did that stream, so I don't really have any clips to show, but I do have the soundbite, which was pretty funny and completely unfortunate.
You give me like 5, 6.
Oh, that's crazy. Ouch. Oof.
It's pretty tall, no?
Oof. 5, 6.
Is that not tall? 6? How tall are you?
So legally, as per my license,
Legally,
I am 5'8".
5'8".
Yeah,
Wow,
legally as per
that's
my
surprising.
license. That's surprising. What does that mean? All right, time to get terraforming here. Let me take a look at our setup here and see what we've got left and what we can use to get us started. So building in a swampy, marshy sort of style is not something I've ever really attempted before in all of the builds that I've done. So a lot of this is pretty new to me, and I've been trying to figure it out as I go and try and think of all of the different things that might feel like they fit or just help complete the picture of this marshy, swampy, watery, muddy kind of area. So the first big thing that I came up with to try and help sell that was lowering the pathway down to about 1 block below the height of the water level. Essentially where the bulk of the foot traffic is, I just lowered that a little bit below the surface. And of course, when you mix in all of the mud and muddy mangrove roots in these pockets of water, it kind of gives this sense that wherever you're walking, you've kind of dug into the ground just a little bit. Like the ground's gonna give way because of how soft and muddy it is. And then of course you've got the little pockets of water here and there that are just kind of filling up really easily because of how much water is in the area at all times and how muddy everything is. So I did my best to kind of sell that with the pathway that meanders through here, and it meanders quite a bit. We've still got some more details to do, but there will be a reason that it meanders the way it does and why it doesn't take a more direct approach or a more straight shot through here. There's also a lot more that we've got to do around the body of water in front of the house to kind of muddy up the edges and help make the entire thing feel like it's in this muddy environment. But I wanted to bring some attention to the pathway especially, and how I tried to sell that marshy feel by lowering it just that little bit. Of course, deep slate and cobbled deep slate and the ever so occasional blackstone slab in there as well can kind of help sell that muddy palette, that muddy color scheme as well. At least when you surround it with mud and muddy mangrove roots, the other colors can kind of help sell that, but you definitely need the mud to make it feel like it's mud when you're using those deep slate blocks. And while there's still a lot of details to go throughout here to finish what we had built together, I want to point out the tree stump feature of this area that, for the most part, was done by Meggie when we were doing our collab build. The idea is that in that spot there was once a pretty big tree that sat there, and it has since been reclaimed by nature, at least the stump of it here, where you've got some of the roots that are shown off, and one of them arches up and over the pathway. And that just creates a fun little fantasy element as you're walking through the road up to the Witch Manor, where you get to cross under the roots of this once great tree that has now just kind of formed this little archway. And even further back, as you're approaching the house and the water, It helps fill out this picture frame much like what we had built back with our house on the hill and the tree that loomed over it. We've got this sort of picture starting to form on the roadway as you approach the house. As I mentioned a second ago, there's still a lot more detail needed for this area, but this is one of those things that just adds that little bit of flavor to it by adding a whole lot of character and a whole lot of intrigue to the area. Now, I never would have come up with anything like that, but that's definitely in the realm of the type of things that Megiibyte likes to build. As a matter of fact, now's a great time to be able to show off some of the things that Megi's done before. If there was one word to sum up all of these builds and the usual feel that you get from them, it's definitely whimsical, which definitely fits what we did in the previous episode with Drift for this area. Megi's style is very much in the fantasy realm of things and usually involves quite a bit of nature-y elements, especially in the form of mushrooms. It feels like every build has a really fun story behind it, and that's a big reason that they all feel so full of life. These builds here that I'm showing are only a couple of some of the really cool things that she's done before. So I highly encourage you go check out what she's done because there's a lot of really cool little building things that you can learn from seeing some of the things that she puts together. We've got all of the roadway laid out going up to the house right here, and I don't think I'm going to take the path any further than right about this spot, at least for the time being, while we focus our efforts on this area right here. I don't want to get too carried away in some of the smaller details like where this road might meander to long term. But at the start of it, we've got a blending from mud into the deep slates, which are also meant to represent mud, just different textures of it. And then as you kind of come down that little step right there, that's where we start to have this effect where you're a little bit lower than the water level. The ground is kind of sunk in a little bit where the foot traffic might be most common. And while we're lacking a lot of the details here, especially on the right side of the pathway, we've got some of it in with the tree stump, like I mentioned. We've got our little archway, and we can kind of see that effect that I was talking about as you walk underneath it and you approach the house, which, as you turn the corner right here underneath the archway, presents itself perfectly right in frame right here. You get a nice view of this tree stump to the left of it, with all of the leaves and vines and nature-y overgrowth that's happening on top of it. And then from there, you're right up against the water right here, where we've got some of these mangrove roots that are kind of helping blend the mud with the water right here. You can create this really cool effect with the roots, where of course they're waterloggable and you can use them to blend the water with the mud on the edge right here. And I think that worked out perfectly, especially with the fact that we have some mud under the water right here to kind of help sell it as well. But of course, the picture isn't really complete until we get this side over here done, and there's quite a few details that end up going here to fill up this space. I'm excited to get those in place, but before we do, I just wanted to give you a little bit of the feel as you walk down the road. Now we've got this little pocket of water right here separate from the main body of water, and we did some blending with all of the mud and the roots and even some gray carpets as well. And again, it's just more of these little details that we can use to make it feel like it's a little bit more of a marsh. Back here, you get a little bit of a different view of the house as you approach the main entryway right here. We've got this little rickety staircase that's kind of falling apart just a little bit, blending the mud up to the porch right here. And now we've made our way up to the porch and where we left off on the last episode here with the Witch Manor. So I'm fairly happy with how the road has turned out, this little pathway right here, but I can't be too certain on the feel until we start to build up some of the rest of the area over here, starting with the cliff face and some of the accenting details in the grass over on this side, and then bringing it over to the other side, and even further along the body of water over there. We really need to fill in that landscape right there as well to really make this a complete picture. I think that's enough yapping for the feel that we're trying to go for in this area, and I think we're ready to get some of these big details in place so that we can really start to see all of this come together. beautiful sunrise. If only not for the solicitors in this area. Teach these guys a lesson about coming here. Oh, actually, this is a great reminder. I didn't know these guys would trade the eye blossoms, but that is a perfect segue for part of what I want to get done in this episode. We are officially in the new update, which means we've got a pale garden that we can go find and go grab some new blocks. Before we do that though, I want to walk you guys through this area now that we've got it fully built up, at least to the point in which Megiibyte and myself got in our collab session. So this is the lead up to the Witch Manor. We've got, of course, the pathway, and I covered all of that with all of the mud, and now we've got all of the accenting details. So, of course, we've got the big mushroom in the house over yonder, but we decided to continue that theme by adding some more over here. And we stuck with a red mushroom theme to feel more akin to mushrooms that you might expect. In big part, that's so that the blue coloration over there stands out that little bit more, all while keeping a kind of mushroomy shape to it. And of course, selling that this area is going to have a lot of big fantasy growths like this big mushroom right here as well, which all adds to make that feel like it makes a little bit more sense in this area. Now, there's a lot of tiny little details that we added throughout here, and one of the things I still need to do is grab some bone meal and add a couple glowing glowberries to some of these vines up here. I think having a little bit of light would definitely add that nice little touch. But as we walk throughout this area, you've already seen the tree stump and the root that kind of hangs up and over. And apparently I need to get some string for these vines right here. Ojang, please, I'm begging you, let us shear vines like we can shear glowberries, please. That's all I want in my life, please. So I'll have to fix that at some point. We got the sound of running water nearby, and I actually really like that sound. It's not necessarily intentional. It comes from over here. I've got a couple lily pads on the tree stump on the base of it. I figured that would be a pretty cool little detail that you can get. All you've got to do is take a top slab and you waterlog it, and then you can place a lily pad on top of it. You can't normally place lily pads on full blocks or even top slabs unless it's water, but I found this cool little trick. If you just waterlog a slab, you can put a lily pad on it, and so it adds this nice little effect to the overgrown, reclaimed by nature sort of tree stump that we're going for. Another thing you might notice around here is we've got some cattails sitting by the water. I added a couple more around the area back over here as well. And then I tried something similar over here with green candles, and this is mostly just meant to represent some kind of like abnormally tall grass or weed potentially that's just growing in this area in clumps. So we've got a little bit right here going on, and then we've got a couple more over there as well. I felt like it was a nice detail that kind of rhymed with the cattail theme that we have going on in some of these pockets of water, and it would fit really well considering we have all of the grass and moss and ferns and everything else around the area. We of course added some smaller mushrooms right here using a lot of the same coloration that we did on the big one, just on a larger scale. We're kind of combining these red colors with this sandstone and birchwood kind of palette, and I think it works out really nicely for trying to get some different mushrooms in the area. We do of course have some classic terraforming up here, just a little cliffside, nothing fancy whatsoever. We kind of mossed over a bunch of it and then added a little tiny bit of shading here and there, but for the most part it's a very simple little cliff. It's not meant to be the focus of this area, it's just meant to enhance the rest of the details, and I think it does that pretty nicely overall. This big mushroom looming over the path is of course one of the main pieces of it, and as you walk through this area and the Witch Manor comes into focus a little bit more, you pass underneath this big mushroom, you have the archway right here. There's all these fun little details that can kind of draw your attention before you turn this corner and the real centerpiece is unveiled. Now, of course, there's a lot of work to go in this area. I want to add some stuff on the backside over here, and then there's all of this empty space over here as well that we can definitely work with. I've got some plans for at least the area behind my head. This area over here, we're going to have to figure it out a little bit, and then of course, long term, I know what I want to do up above and up on this hill back there. Before we do all of that though, I mentioned that we're in the new update and there's some pale moss and delicious pale oak that is calling our name. So for the first time since maybe the first episode of this series, it's adventure time. Let's grab a boat. We found one, and I was not ready for it to be this massive. And not only is it this massive, but look how looming it is. It's just up on this plateau. That is such a cool view coming around here through the jungle, emptying out into this area, and then just seeing that right there. That is a super, super cool look. And also, this is one of the instances where you can hear it the most. We have been using ambient sounds for the entirety of this world, and it doesn't always make itself known. But here in the jungle, it is a little louder, and you can really hear all of the little ambient nature sounds, and I love this mod so much. If you're not using ambient sounds, I cannot recommend it enough. But anyway, back to the task at hand. We've got a pale garden up ahead that we can go explore and get some good stuff from. And not only that, but right over there, there's actually a woodland mansion. And that's the very first one that I know of in this world. I don't know of any other locations where a mansion could be found. And we just kind of happened to find one right next to where the Pale Garden is. So that was a crazy coincidence and maybe could be worth doing a little exploring on an upcoming stream. This video will probably end up coming out after that stream happens. But if you don't know, every Friday, we stream from this world over on Twitch, and then I upload the VODs of those streams over on the Acrylic VODs channel. So if you ever want to catch a VOD of any of our streams, whether it's from this world or another world, I do upload those over there. Regardless, I think we'll save the mansion for a little bit later, and for now, let's go take a look at what we can find in the Pale Garden. All right, as we approach a little bit closer, I decided to take my wings off and not even have them on the hotbar. I want to kind of get the full experience, and I think it's perfect that the build-up into this biome right here is through this dark oak forest. You kind of get a little bit of that spooky vibe to begin with all of the dark spaces under the trees and all of the potential for mobs to spawn. And now we're in here, and I'd be really curious to know if ambient sounds does any fancy things for this biome as well. But here we are, and it looks like we got a couple of eye blossoms over here, and you can pick them up with just an empty fist. But look at this up here. I am using better fog controls, I think is the name of the mod, to be able to better determine where the fog starts and where the fog ends. And I think it creates this really cool look up here. We of course have some of these falling leaves as well, which I think is really cool. And look at this. As I come over here, the sky's a little more blue, but as we come into here, the entire sky changes to this very murky, this kind of ominous, dull gray color. Very interesting, definitely matches the biome, really, really cool effect. And as we come a little bit further in, it's like everything just goes grayscale, the sky included. I think that's such a cool touch. The aesthetics in this biome are really, really cool, and I think especially as nighttime falls, we'll really get an interesting experience throughout here. My only gripe with the addition of this biome is I really wish they made the trees a little more unique in terms of the shape. The pale oak we'll get to in a second, but these are just reskinned dark oak trees, and I really, really wish they went with a more unique design to make this place feel a little more special. I think it could have gone a really long way, but at the end of the day, I can't complain too much because all of this area, this is such a cool biome. We've got some new plants out of it, and I really like how they're different in the daytime versus the nighttime. I think that's really cool. And of course, we got a moss variant. That's not something I ever thought we'd get, is another moss variant, but here we are. More moss, more carpets, just a different shade. And these right here, I forget exactly what they're called, but I think I have some shears if I grab some out of here. We'll grab intern Steve here and take a look. These are called pale hanging moss. These are really, really cool. We don't have a regular moss version of this unless you might count glowberries to kind of fit that aesthetic. But this is going to be a really, really nice thing to have. Now, it looks like nighttime's approaching. I'm going to turn the brightness up just so it looks a little bit better on the video, because the 30 brightness is great in the daytime, but you can't see anything on the video at night. So let's turn the brightness up just a little bit. We know we've got mobs spawning, so this is where it gets a little more interesting. I'm going to try to avoid those zombies. We're just going to walk around for a little bit. Oh, and already we can see a creaking right there. He doesn't seem to have noticed us. And he's actually moving while we're looking at him, interestingly enough. I wonder at what point will it register that I'm looking at it and stop moving. Oh, there it is. It's right there. That's the point. So what would we call that? That's like 20 blocks or something? 15? I don't know. It's kind of weird because it's at a diagonal. But we've got one right there. I wonder just how crazy it could get if I'm walking around here and I'm not doing anything about that guy back there, he seems to have a pretty small aggro range for sure. But if I'm just kind of walking around, I wonder how crazy it could get in terms of the number of them that could start appearing. Like, is it possible that we end up being chased by like 10 of them at once? I know they don't linger too far away from their home tree, so that has got to be a part of it for sure. We've only seen the ones so far, and I'm also wondering at what range do they start spawning? So what I mean by that is if there's trees too far away from the player, will they still spawn, or will they only start appearing when I'm close enough to their home tree? We've got another one right there. I've only seen zombies in here so far outside of the creaking themselves. We do have a smite axe, which usually helps make these a one-shot, but yeah, it's a lot of zombies around here. I'm listening very closely to footsteps and everything like that, and what I might need to do is actually turn the game volume up. I'm gonna bump hostile creatures up to maybe 6%, I think. They're already very loud, even at that. Oh, ooh, I did not like that. I did not like that the second he had a chance. You can almost hear, I need to get rid of the zombie to be able to hear it better. But it's like you can hear twigs snapping, like even when they're not moving, unless it's another one nearby. But just kind of ambient, very occasional sounds of like sticks or twigs or the like. It's very, very interesting how these work. I think this is a fantastic addition to the game. I think this is really cool. It kind of fits that like pseudo horror, or I guess horror light element that they started introducing with the Deep Dark and the Warden and all of the stealth mechanics. Very interesting that they continue to go down that route with this update here. I do think it's really cool, and I think it could add some really interesting mechanics for map design, for example, or game design within Minecraft, all of that kind of stuff. Very, very cool, and definitely cool to get to see these guys in action just a little bit. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to turn around here and let them get a hit or two. They don't really deal a ton of damage. They definitely flail out like crazy when they hit you. I do have protection for armor all the way around, and the only thing that is a netherite is the chest plate. It's all invisible because of the texture pack so that you could see my skin better, but it looks like if you're fully geared up, they're not really going to do much of anything other than the little spook factor that they have when they appear and startle you around a corner. At least when you're in the end game, they don't really do too much, but of course, as many of you already know, they are indestructible. So, as a matter of fact, we're right here next to this tree, but they cannot be killed at all, no matter what you do to them or how much damage you do or anything like that. They will always survive until daytime comes around, where he'll disappear until the next night approaches. So, I'm hitting him a bunch of times because I want to try and get a little bit of resin while we're here. A little bit of everything that we can get. So if we just keep doing damage to him, we'll eventually start getting a lot more resin up on the tree. Because it kind of is, I'm pretty sure, based on how much damage they take, or maybe just how frequently they're taking damage, or something to that effect. Now some creepers around here. It's definitely sketchy at nighttime, but if we can get ourselves up into this tree, we can find the heart and make this guy disappear without having to wait until daytime. It'd be a little sketchy, though. I just got to keep him in eyesight right there. And it looks like we've got a little bit of resin. We got a resin clump, so we can start doing some cool things with that as well. But it looks like right there is the creaking heart. So we get rid of that, and we can actually pick it up as well. But he's got a cool little animation. He disappears. And you can craft these as well as gather these. So this could be really interesting as well. You'll be able to take these around with you. You're not limited to where they can spawn, kind of like you are with the Warden. You have to have a naturally generated Shrieker. But with this guy, you can fully control where you bring him and where he spawns, which I think is really, really cool. All right, I've gone ahead and slept, and to get to the main draw of this place, it is, of course, if you have not already guessed, the pale oak wood. These trees right here, this is something I have been waiting for such a long time in Minecraft, is a wood type that is lighter than birch and less saturated than birch as well. Something a little less yellow and a little more white to be able to work with in the wood family. especially because it gives us all of those wooden options: trapdoors, fences, buttons, everything that you get with wood, which is typically a lot more variance than any other block gets, even the stone types for that. And I'm super excited to get to play around with the pale oak wood, the pale oak logs, all of that kind of stuff, because I have been waiting for this color to exist as a wood type for so long in this game. So that is by far my favorite part of this update, without a doubt. And of course, while we're here, I'll definitely make sure to stock up on some of the eye blossoms. We've got some open and some closed, and I'm actually curious to test this out right here. If I gathered one while it was open, and then I placed it in the day, does it close? Or does it stay open? It looks like it stays open. So that is really interesting to know. If you specifically want one or the other, all you have to do is pick it up in that state, and it looks like it will retain that state no matter what you do. So I could probably have closed ones at nighttime as long as I pick them up when they're closed. That's really cool as well. And I definitely want to make sure to gather a bunch of this stuff right here, because this is going to be so cool to use. This is such a cool vine or moss or whatever. What was it called? Hanging moss. It's so cool. This is going to be so nice for some decoration and some detail in various builds as we go. And I almost forgot, the carpets here have a really fun little attribute right here. And this is completely at random as well. Unlike the normal moss carpets, these ones kind of grow up the side of whatever you place them next to. And it's kind of at random. So usually like varied textures will just kind of be based on the coordinate. But with these ones, it's just place it, break it, place it, and you'll end up with either one tall or two tall. And this does work on different blocks. So it doesn't have to be the edge of a tree. It can be a dirt block. It can be whatever block you want it to be there. As long as it's a full block, I don't think you could do it with slabs or any transparent blocks, but that's going to be a really cool detail, very subtle, but something that you can definitely do some cool stuff with if you find some good uses. I'm going to stick around here for just a little bit and gather a bunch of this stuff to bring back home, and once we get back there, we've got a couple more things to build around the Witch Manor. So back over here next to the manor and where we added all of these details, there's a distinct lack of any of these details beyond this kind of edge right here, where we've got this big wide open hill that just kind of hugs the water, and of course the river that passes through as well. Now, long term, I've got a lot of plans for what I want to do in this area with some of the cooler details, some of the bigger details, something to kind of fit a little more of what we did behind me there. But I don't think I'm ready to get any of those larger details in place until we have a good baseline to work with. So what I'm thinking we need to do around this area is I need to take this muddy, marshy kind of environment and I need to expand it around this edge of the water. We can just call it the pond for now. But take that mud and expand it over here, kind of get some more of these details up on this hillside, and maybe even start doing a little bit over here as well. I effectively want to take everything around the house, and we want to muddy up the edges of the river to make the entire thing feel like it all sort of flows with this atmosphere right here, and it's not just this spot specifically. So, of course, we'll take a lot of the mud and muddy mangrove roots and normal mangrove roots, and we'll kind of have this effect going on around the edges of the river, but I'm also going to expand a lot of the grass and ferns and some of this foliage as well. And we'll even take a lot of the details with the glass and the candles. We'll try to get some more cattails around the area. We'll do some of these large strands of grass or weeds or whatever they are as well. And that'll all kind of help build up the area to fit in a little more with the hyper detailed spot that we did right here. Now, in terms of mushrooms and things like that, I think that is part of the bigger details that I think we're going to add in the next episode. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself on this one alone, but I'm really excited to get those in place. Like I said, though, I think this area could do with a lot of the lesser details, a lot of the smaller things, to really set the stage for some of the bigger and better things that we want to add. So I'm going to figure out how much mud and everything else we have left and get cracking on dressing this place up just a little bit more. A couple stacks of bone meal later, I think we've got something that works pretty well. It also took a whole lot of green dye, so pretty much all of the cactus I had sitting around for all the glass and some of the candles as well. Never quite realized just how expensive it was to dye candles, but that's a thing apparently. Anyway, we've gotten to a point that I'm pretty happy with. Considering we're still going to need a lot of detail still to be added, we've got some really big things that are going to happen, and we're just kind of setting ourselves up for that. So the main thing I did was I took the mud around the edges of the water and I continued it all around this plot, I guess we can call it. So you can see a lot of it over there that's been expanded down towards the edge of the river, and right around that spot is about where it tapers out, and then over on the other side you can see where it begins, and that mud kind of follows that little hillside along the riverbank on the opposite side of the house, and eventually makes its way right over to about there. And of course, where the house is itself, I added a bunch of mud underneath so that it wasn't all grass and felt like it was also a part of the muddy area. And it all circles around to right about here. I of course took the mangrove roots and I added those into the water to help the blending process. I got some lily pads as well. I thought that would be a nice touch every so often. And beyond that, it was just a lot of the usual mud and muddy mangrove roots kind of mixture along these edges to get this sort of look to the place. I would waterlog a mangrove root every so often in the ground as well, just to help sell that marshy feel again. And of course, I added some of these cattails and then some of the similar details, these long grassy weeds or whatever with the green candles. I added a couple pockets of those around just to add that extra little touch. One thing that I did struggle with a little bit outside of those details right there was detailing the muddy area itself. When it comes to grassy areas like up here, we've got ferns and we've got grass and tall ferns and bushes and all of these kinds of things that can help make this place feel lively and detailed, but I couldn't think of too many different things for the muddy pockets or muddy areas. We just have some gray carpets to add that little bit of variation. We of course have the mangrove roots, and then, of course, these glass and candle details that are in pockets every so often, but of course, you don't want to overdo. So it does leave the muddy areas feeling a little bit bland, a little plain. Maybe it's just me, maybe I'm overthinking it, and maybe we just need to get the rest of the place built up. Because after all, this isn't meant to be where you're focusing. This is just supposed to be an accenting detail to the area. Like, eventually, we're going to have a lot of other things that are drawing your eye around the area here, so maybe it's not a big problem, and I just need to see it all the way through to get the proper feel. If we stand up here on the tree stump, however, you can kind of get a good view of the area and all of the details that we've been putting in place today, all of the little things that we've added to the area to really start to bring it to life. And I'm really happy with where we've gotten so far. Now, one of the big things that I want to add in this area is some more of these mushrooms like what's behind my head. I've come up with a couple different designs that I think will be a lot of fun to add in the surrounding area so that we can get a couple more of those, and it's not just the one on the house and this pocket right here. We're going to kind of sprinkle them all around the area right here to help fill in all of the details down below. And I say down below because, of course, I hinted at it earlier, but the main piece of this build is going to sit above, and it's going to come off of that slope right there, that plateau back there. And I'm super excited to get to that part, but I wanted to save that for last, so I'm just trying to make sure we get all of the details around here done first, so that when we cap it all off, it's with the biggest and best piece of this area. It is also worth mentioning that by the time this episode goes up, we're going to be pretty much in the midst of the holiday season, so there might be a little bit of a gap between this episode and the next one, just given all the events and family time and a little bit of time off. That's all going to be had in the next couple of days as we get through the holidays and the new year, of course. There won't be a big hiatus of videos by any means. I just might have a couple days where I can't work on it like I usually would. So if the next episode ends up being 10 days or more away from this one, you'll know why, but I'm pretty sure that's the case for most people releasing videos around this time of year. If I had to guess, I don't know, I'm new to the whole thing, but that'll be the case. And with that in mind, I definitely wanted to make sure that I could get this episode out for you guys to have as the holiday season ramps up, give you something to watch, and carry over until the next one is ready. So let me know what you think of all of the details that we added around this area, some of the muddy things, the tree stump, the mushrooms, all of that kind of stuff, and let me know if you have any other ideas for some other cool ideas you would like to see throughout this little area. Also, don't forget to go check out some of Megiibyte's content. She does some really cool things, and I couldn't have gotten this area to look as good as it does without her help. It's officially mushroom building day. We're back here already at the Marshy Grove with our little witch manor right here, and today's the day that we really start cranking out a bunch of the nature-y and terrain aesthetics around this area to really start to piece this puzzle together. Recently, we've come out to this area and started building up a little bit of our fantasy region of the world, and so far that consisted of 2 different build collabs that I did with other creators, the first of which being this witch manor right here with InfiniteDrift, and then of course a lot of the surrounding and build up area over here with Megiibyte. Both fantastic creators, and I had a lot of fun doing that, but today we are all on our own, and I have a great idea for what I want to get accomplished in this episode, and it involves mushrooms, of course, and quite a few of them in the surrounding area over here. We really need to start bringing this place together and making it feel a little more sectioned off from the surrounding world. I've talked about in a couple previous episodes that long-term, the goal for this area is to have one big main piece, and that's going to happen from off of the plateau up there and kind of come up and over top. I'm not sure if I've mentioned what that piece will be yet, but some of you may already know because I've talked about it on a stream here or there. Anyway, that is going to need its own entire episode, and I didn't want to do that until I had everything else in this area complete first. So if we make our way up the hill over here where we can see everything from our little staging ground, I've prepared a ton of stuff in various shulker boxes, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to probably need to go get some more because I'm really starting to hurt on storage in this world. And that does remind me, storage is also something that we'll have to figure out in one of the upcoming episodes, so that should be pretty exciting when the time comes. Back to the topic at hand, though, I've got a bunch of stuff left over from when we built the house and the surrounding terrain down there, and that's probably going to help us out quite a bit. I'm thinking I'm going to add a bunch of different custom mushrooms all around the area, mostly leaning kind of over here, and then on this hillside right here. And as a matter of fact, this hillside itself is not going to remain unchanged. We're actually going to do a good amount of terraforming outside of just building the organics. I'm thinking a really good start would be building up a little bit of an elevated section of land kind of in this space right here with a little bit of a cliffside, just kind of building up to it, and that'll really help section off all of this area and make it feel like it's a little lower down versus the rest of it, and it kind of takes away that feeling that this is just one big field and it suddenly turns a little swampy. It's going to kind of give it a little more distinction, and like I said, a little bit of a boundary of sorts, a little bit of a divider from one area of this land to this area right here that we've been really putting the work into in the last couple episodes. Fortunately, I've already prepared everything we're going to need for this, so why waste any more time? Let's get that little cliffside built. That definitely changes the look around here. I think that part we've definitely accomplished. Now, a couple of things I want to go over with what we've just put in place. The main goal being that we've now made this place feel much more enclosed in the space that we're in, given we already had this big hill right here, this natural plateau that generated, and then of course the custom hill we just built. Now, they don't exactly match per se, and I wasn't necessarily going for it. Now, if I wanted to rocky up this surface or even kind of dirt across this surface to make it match, sure, we could do that, but I felt like it would be a little more interesting if I left the custom terrain feeling a little more custom. Not only that, but you'll notice that it's not overly detailed. There's a little bit of shading in there, and I might still touch it up a little further. At least when we get to the deep slate, it's quite the contrast, and I might go with something a little more subtle towards the bottom. But either way, the lack of detail, or at least extreme detail in the side, is that this is not meant to be the focus. So what we've built here with this big hill, this is meant to make the place feel more enclosed, like I mentioned. But our focus is going to be with what we build a little later on, which is going to be a bunch of organics, really bringing the place to life with some more mushrooms, much like what I did there, but of some different colors and shapes and sizes, all filling out this area to really hammer home that fantasy wildlife aspect. Would fungus be considered wildlife? I don't know, but it kind of makes sense. A little bit. Either way, point being, this is not going to be the main focus at the end of the day, so I think once we get the rest of everything put together and built up in this area, and this big custom hill becomes more of a background component and more of a supplementary piece, I think that's when this is really going to shine, as opposed to where it is right now, where it's just kind of this big cliff that in a lot of ways is jarring and doesn't really match a lot of what's going on around it. I think we give it time, we trust the process, we see it through, and we end up with something pretty nice. There is a couple of gaps still. This gap right here where I have our little staging grounds, it just so happened that I had it right where I was going to build that, so that was a little quirk I didn't see coming. That'll get fixed a little later on once I'm ready to pick everything up and move. And then up top, I left a little bit of room, a little bit of scuff where I think I'm going to put a mushroom, at least one. We might do two, maybe three. I'm going to kind of play it by ear and see, but I felt like having some mushrooms up top as well would kind of help tie everything together. Now, of course, I wanted what we built here to be nice and visible, and I really wanted the effect it has to take place from anywhere you're walking over in this area specifically, as you follow the little pathway through this highly detailed area we built, and then of course make your way towards the house. So I made sure that from over here the sightline worked in such a way that it was always present, much like the other naturally generated plateau up here is as well, so that it really hammers home that feeling that you're kind of in a more sunken area where the marshy, muddy feeling makes a little more sense. And of course we do have that big natural hill on the other side of the house, which works to help all of this as well. You can see from over here that in the regular stone area, I did a mixture of stone, andesite, and light gray wool to kind of get a little bit of a patchy, splotchy coloration and texture change throughout the regular stone, so that it wasn't all just one consistent thing, kind of like what happens with the shading a little bit, but of course that shading is meant to be viewed from further away. That's kind of how it's designed and what makes it look the best. But when it comes to the grass, I tried a couple new things that I'm not used to doing. A lot of times moss is a go-to to work with grass, and it does work really good, but I figured why stop there, and why not play around with mixing in some other things. So you can see we've got a little bit of green wool and some green concrete, and that gives us two more unique shades of green, as well as two more unique textures that aren't quite represented between grass and moss. And so what I did was I tried to be a little splotchy with everything as we go throughout the hill. You'll see big patterns of moss, you'll see some areas that are untouched grass, you'll see some spots that are concrete, some that are wool. And the idea was that we could make this place look all that more interesting in somewhat a subtle fashion. And at the end of the day, I think it turned out pretty good. This is something I'm gonna have to experiment with a little bit more when it comes to grass detailing and terraforming whenever I need to in the future. It is worth mentioning also that I have not yet taken the bone meal or loose strands of grass and ferns and all of that to this area up here, and I do indeed intend to do that because leaving it all boring and plain like this is a little bit jarring for sure. especially with how detailed everything around the area is. I think we'll save all of the grassy bits and bone meal and whatnot for once I go through and we start building all of the organics and mushrooms and all of that around the area, so you'll probably see that come together towards the end of the episode. Before we move on, however, I did want to bring some attention to the backside of the build, and not just because it's actually done, but rather there is a purpose back here. So I talked a lot on the other side about how the other side is meant to be a background piece, something that's supplementary to some of the things that are going to draw your eye. Now over here, it kind of works in reverse. I don't currently plan to build much of anything out in this area, at least not for the time being. That day may come in the future, but for now we have this big wide open area between our starter house over there and of course where we're building over here. And because there's no real detail or big builds out here other than the hill itself, at least from this direction, I figured I would try and build it in a way that this became more of a focal point. So I took a little bit extra time with how I shaped everything, the stone patterns, the grass patterns, all of that, to get something that looked like it could be a focal point, especially once there's a lot of grass up there and we kind of take the attention to detail with bone mealing and all of those little things, patch up some of these holes and whatnot, so that whenever you're approaching this area from where our starter house is, or even anything further on beyond that direction over there, you have something that draws your eye, that's meant to draw your eye, and it's not this background piece that doesn't have anything to draw your attention away from it, if that makes sense. Like, from this side, you're supposed to focus on it, and from the other side, you're not supposed to focus on it. But like, we build it good enough that you can focus on it on the other side, or not on this side, and it still works, and it's still fine. Surely you get the idea, right? And then, of course, there is the view from up top here. This is a really good view of the area, I think. I really like how it looks, and I do think after we get the rest of the organics and some more mushrooms built throughout the area, it is going to look great. But more specifically, once we can cap this area off with the big detail from over here on the right side, kind of lingering over the whole build, that is really going to be something. The goal is that it is going to make this place feel so magical, especially from up here on the hill, as well as when you're approaching it from the muddy road down there. You're kind of splitting these two hills and entering this sunken area. You're going to have this huge looming thing taking up the sky right here, and I think it's going to paint such a nice picture. I cannot wait for when we do that, and I think when we do, we definitely got to make sure to get all kinds of different angles. Some of the best might just be from up on this new hill. Alright, so I mentioned before that I want to build a bunch of different mushrooms in this area. That's really going to be how we start to fill this place up, give you some more stuff to look at, and bring it to life. Now, I don't want to just throw that into a big time lapse and then build all of it in one go and then explain it all afterwards, like we do a lot of the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I would like to give you guys a little bit more of an insight as we build them into what I'm thinking and all of the other little details that go on in my mind about where I place it and the shapes and how it relates to everything around it. I think that's something that we could do a lot more often when it comes to building things on this series, is taking the time to kind of break it down just a little bit more. And it's something I've been experimenting with just a little bit in recent episodes, as you may have noticed, and I think we've done a pretty decent job with it. That being said, the first mushroom that I want to get built is going to be right over in this area right here, next to where we've got some of these grass details and even cattails over there. It's going to sit pretty much in front of the house, but again, it's important to remember that the main sight line we're focused on is the sight line from the pathway to and from this area, the muddy area that goes over in this direction. So given that's the case, what we build over here is going to take up a lot of this space in the air just behind this big old stump, and will eventually be accompanied by some other things to help fill up some more of these areas around as well, to eventually paint a picture that's full of all kinds of different custom mushrooms and life, and we'll start to see this place really start to flourish. So the first mushroom we're going to build is going to be a pretty large brown mushroom, and the brown mushroom isn't going to look anything like your traditional Minecraft vanilla brown mushrooms. We're going to give it a lot more detail than that, and of course it will be a good amount bigger. All right, so before we get started on building it, I wanted to go over the palette just a little bit. We've got our 4 blocks that are going to make up the stem of the mushroom right here, and then I'll explain the cap a little bit after. So we're going with bone blocks towards the very bottom of it, that being the lightest of these colors. That will transition into mushroom stem, which is a little bit darker than even the sandstone, but it's a little more on that white scale before it really starts to crank yellow when we get to the smooth sandstone, and then of course the stripped birch. So I figured the best spot for the mushroom stem would be right there. And the idea here is that these colors are going to differentiate based on shading. So as we get a little bit higher up the stem and a little more underneath the cap where less light can access, we're going to have this stripped birch color right here, whereas towards the very base where the most light might be, we're of course going to have the bone blocks. Now, this shading technique is going to be something that you'll see throughout every mushroom that we build in this episode. It's something that I'm going to try and be consistent with throughout, even though not all of the mushroom stems are going to consist of these 4 blocks specifically. The biggest drawback being bone blocks, and you have this right here that you can't really do anything with. If you're going to have 2 sides of it exposed, you're kind of just stuck dealing with it. But at the end of the day, that is Minecraft, and we gotta make what we have work. So that's gonna make up the stem. We know the shading, and we know it's going to apply to multiple different mushrooms. So I mentioned that this is going to be a brown mushroom. Now for the cap of this one, we're gonna have a combination of 3 different blocks right here. And as a matter of fact, it's gonna look a little more like this. We're gonna go from spruce planks at its darkest to just regular old dirt to packed mud at its lightest. Now, a lot of these caps are going to have more than 3 blocks, like you can see over on that red mushroom right there. I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5, 6 maybe blocks in that alone, not even counting all of the slabs. And much like the mushroom stem, not all of the mushrooms are going to be built the same. So not only are we going to have other colors of mushrooms for the caps, but we're also going to have different types of materials, different numbers of materials. It's going to vary and change quite a bit. But again, just like with the stem, I'm going for a more shading based approach rather than just pure texturing. So we're going to have the darkest color, which in this case for this mushroom is the spruce plank. We're going to have this down around the edges and opposite of where the main light is hitting the mushroom. Now, what I'm referring to as the main light hitting the mushroom is going to be a little tricky because of course the sun moves throughout the day, so we're just kind of stuck picking one spot as where we think the light is currently shining the most on the mushroom, lighting it up the most, and then from there, around the edges, we'll get a little bit darker, which in this case will be dirt, and then finally spruce on the farthest ends of where the packed mud or lightest block sits. It's a little tricky to explain beforehand, but bear with me, and once we get it built, I can kind of show you a little bit better. As we get this next mushroom built and the first of this big expansion of a bunch of them, I want to point out that it turns out significantly better than what I had done on the back of the Witch Manor. And that's because between then and now, I have been making it a point to try and learn Axiom. It's a really, really useful tool for a lot of building, and I've started to incorporate it a little bit here and there. I mentioned it a little earlier in the episode as well. But specifically with organics as well, it can be super useful. The mushrooms that I have been able to design using Axiom kind of as a tool to help with that has been night and day difference from anything I've been able to do before. And I want to take a second to shout out Calvin, who has an incredible tutorial on learning Axiom. I cannot recommend giving that tutorial series a watch, and also taking a look at some of the other things Calvin does as well, because they are a super talented builder and creator. And if you don't know of Calvin, you've been missing out. We've got the first mushroom in place here, or I guess the second or third, depending on how you count the other 2, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a walkthrough so you can kind of see the shape and the different viewpoints of this big brown mushroom that we had just put together. I think it fits this area perfectly. It fills this spot very nicely just to the left of the stump and a little bit further away from where we have the house and everything else going on. And of course, like I've been hinting at, this is going to be one of many. Now, this is going to be one of the larger ones, maybe the largest. Some of the other ones are going to be a little bit smaller, all bigger than those tiny guys right there, but kind of somewhere in between that range. The biggest thing is getting them big enough to be able to shape them nicely, but not too big so that they are overpowering in this area. Now, my definition of overpowering for this area would be pretty big because all of them at the end of the day are going to be multiple sizes bigger than the player. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it'll fit the vibe we're going for in this area. And while it might be a little jarring at first, you're gonna have to hear me out. Regardless, here's what the big brown mushroom looks like throughout all of the pathway area right here. I think we've done something really cool. I like that it's placed down by a lot of these grassy details and the little cattails down there as well. I think the shaping of it turned out really good, and a lot of that is thanks to some of the tools that I have on Axiom, of course. I went ahead and made this mushroom a little bit of a double, kind of like what we've got up on the chimney, and not something that we really played around with on that red one over there. I don't know how many of these I'll add like a secondary little cap growing off of the main one from, but I think it's a nice little detail here and there just to sprinkle it up that little bit extra. If we make our way to the front porch of the house, this is what it looks like from over here. So not the best sightline for it. It's definitely aimed at being viewed from the pathway over there. But at the end of the day, you still know it's a mushroom. You can still see what's going on right here. And it does kind of take on its own unique look from this side where the cap looks a little more circular and a little less pointed on the top. So you kind of get a couple different mushrooms in one in a way. I'm really happy with how that one turned out. I feel like I'm learning a lot about organics and mushroom building specifically. And as for the rest of them that I want to build around this area, we have a multitude of colors. We're going to add some red ones, some more brown ones. I've even got some crazy ones. We're going to do an orange one, a white one, and maybe even one extra to kind of match what's going on with the chimney in the manor. So I think I've gathered enough materials to make all of these mushrooms possible. It is going to take a minute to build, however, but I'm super excited and I don't want to wait anymore to get the rest of this area fleshed out and get all of these mushrooms thriving. I've got to say, this is probably the most interesting way that I have filled space before. I've done a little bit of trees in my time, but I have never done mushrooms, never done them like this at the very least. A lot of what we've been doing in this episode and the last has really been an introduction into organics like mushrooms specifically, and I guess just fungus for me as a builder, being I've never really played around with it too much before. And I've got to say, it is a lot of fun to put these together, once you can start to get the right shapes and start to figure out exactly how you're supposed to go about it to really capture that true to real life or even fantasy depictions of various mushrooms and fungus and plant life, generally speaking, getting these organics just right. Once you kind of make it click in your mind and you can really start to paint these out in blocks, it starts to become a lot of fun to put these together. I understand why people who build mushrooms have so much fun with it now that I've done this whole area and we've got so many of these in place. And I do think this does a lot to really sell the area quite a bit. Of course, there's still a fair amount of like vanilla Minecraft stuff going on in the background that can kind of pull you out of the immersion just a little bit, but I think that's okay. At the end of the day, if we were to continue just going around the outskirts and continually touching up everything, we would be here for another 20 episodes. And while we very well may do more work out here, outside of what we're wrapping up in this episode and what I want to do in the next one, I think we're going to step away from this area right after that and focus a little bit on that secret third area. I'm really excited to get to that. But that's a little further down the line still. Let's talk about the mushrooms that we've put in place here. So as I mentioned before, we were going to have a wide range of different mushrooms, from brown ones to red ones to blue and orange, and we even have a white cap over there. And even at that, there are 2 different brown mushrooms, 2 different red mushrooms, and then it's the same one orange one twice, and then we have one white, one blue, of course. So we got a good range. I tried to build enough of them that we would feel like the area was varied up enough once we had them all in place, and I think we did a pretty good job with that. There were a couple of these mushrooms that were easier than others, a couple of them that proved pretty difficult. I would say the hardest one of all of them was actually the white cap over there, which I tried to give some extra details up along the stem, and I used some real life mushroom references for that. We tried to get a little bit of some fuzzies and this little ring going around the stem right there. And then of course with white cap mushrooms, a lot of the time they're so perfectly shaped around the base of the cap that I really tried to capture that, but it was tricky. This still feels a little bit petrified, like it's made out of some kind of stone or wood, and I mean, it kind of is with, you know, diorite and pale oak being involved, but I think we did just enough around the edges and around the details on the stem right there to just sell it that little bit more. I used a little bit of the new pale moss carpet to get a little bit of these like dirt details because it's so white that any specks of dirt would show up a little more. So I think that was accomplished pretty nicely as well, but that was definitely the trickiest of all of them. And in terms of which one's my favorite, it's kind of a toss-up. It's either this big brown one right here that we started with, or it's the big red one over there. One of those two. I think it's just because the bigger you go, the more detailed and the better shaping you can get, and that's why I like those two so much. But of course, given the scale of this area, I didn't want to have too many of these really big mushrooms. We only had a couple of them. Otherwise, we were going to start to make everything else around this place feel a little bit too small, so I had to stick with this sort of medium scale right here, where we've got a couple brown ones, the red ones, and then of course, the fun colors as well. All in all, I am really happy with how everything turned out, and I'm really happy with how it makes this place feel. As a matter of fact, now's a good time to bring back to your attention the hillside that we did earlier in this episode. I had been mentioning that it's not supposed to be a foreground element. It's not supposed to draw your eye. It's supposed to be supplementary to some of the other things that do draw your eye. And I think right here we can see that pretty well, where we've got these mushrooms drawing your attention. We of course have the first one up there. We've got a red one, an orange one. We even have one brown one, smaller, all the way up on top. And then we've got some more going on around here as well. So that hillside in the background kind of acts as the supplementary piece. I've been using that word a lot in this episode, where you still notice it, and it just helps improve everything going on in this situation. But because it's not your main focus and you have these other pops of color and these other organics to draw your attention, we can get away with things like a slightly less detailed cliff face and shaping for the hill back there. We can kind of keep it relatively simple. It does the trick, it does its job, and we don't need to overcomplicate it or spend too much time on that when we could be doing other things like these mushrooms. I think that's a valuable little tool when it comes to building. It's something that we'll continue to use as we progress through this world. As a matter of fact, you could even get away with putting something else right here. I decided not to because it was starting to feel a little bit crowded, or at least get close to feeling a little bit crowded, and I didn't want to go too overboard with how many we built, but you very well could, and could even sprinkle in some trees or bushes around here as well. And who knows, maybe we end up deciding to do that after all. But for now, I think we've done a whole lot to transform this area entirely, and we've set it up perfectly for what I want to get to in the next episode. I've hinted at it a bunch already, and you're probably dying to know what it is. As a matter of fact, some of you do already know, as I've hinted at before. But right above us here, stemming from this vanilla hill, this plateau up here, we are going to build an absolutely massive jacaranda tree. Jacaranda, however you pronounce it. We're gonna build a huge custom version of that kind of tree. It's going to be even bigger than the tree that we built next to our fantasy house in the first couple of episodes. And I cannot wait to get it in place because I think it is really going to make this place pop. That is going to be the spire of this region, if you will, that huge build that you can't help but notice from super far away, and it draws your attention and wows you wherever you see it from. Now, I'm looking up here because we're not just going to build it up on the hill. It's actually going to be built out of the slope, and it is going to hang over top a lot of this area. We're going to have the tree kind of at this 45-degree angle or something similar, where the canopy and the branches sprawl out over top, and we're going to end up with these pockets of light through the canopy shining down here where we're standing around the mud and the mushrooms, and then some areas are going to be a little more shaded. And it's going to transform this area completely just after we already transformed it in this episode. I am super excited to get that build started. It's gotta be planned. I haven't started building it at all in planning and concept building or anything like that. So I've got that tall task ahead of me, as well as, of course, building it in the next episode. So needless to say, if the time between this episode and the next one is a little bit longer, you probably know why. It may even involve a little bit of custom terraforming as well up on that hillside, just to make it work a little bit better. We'll see how it goes. I don't want to have to redo this entire hillside right here or add a bunch to the top, but anything I need to do to kind of help supplement the tree that I want to build in here and maybe the roots around the area, we'll go ahead and do that, and I'll try to keep it at that. Regardless, that is something that's going to take a lot of time, and speaking of time, I've been in a little bit of crunch to get this episode out to you guys in time because it's been quite a while since the last one came out, and I didn't want it to go even longer. So with that in mind, you'll have to let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see any other details around this area, what you think might look good, and what you thought of all of the mushrooms that we built. As always, I want to give a special shout out to everyone who supports the content over on Patreon. It's thanks to you guys I can do this. And don't forget, if anyone else wants to join, the link is down in the description. With all that said and done, I have got a huge tree to go plan and episode to work on. So, as always, I hope you left today feeling just a little bit inspired.